Good evening. This meeting of the Board of Education for February 25th, 2013 is called to order. I'd like to welcome everybody present and a great welcome to our television viewers. All items that will be voted on this evening have been posted as required by state law. This meeting is being televised live and will be replayed throughout the next 2 weeks. Please check the board website for replay times. You can also find archives of the video at the website. Director Sargent is absent this evening, and Director Regan will be joining us shortly. We have interpreters here with us this evening in Spanish and Vietnamese. If you could introduce yourselves and let folks know where you'll be.
Buenas noches. Me llamo Carmen Bittner y soy la intérprete en español. Si necesita servicios de interpretación en español, vamos a estar en la parte trasera. Gracias.
Con chào cô chú ạ. Nếu mà cô chú có cần thông dịch tiếng Việt á, thì xin cô chú vô lòng ở phía sau gặp con. Con cảm ơn.
Thank you. With that, we will move on to the Superintendent's Report. Superintendent Smith.
So I actually was looking for people who are going to come up and speak about my first item, which was our International Youth Leadership Conference. This was the first one, and our Bontrong and Veronica Magalanis from our ESL department were the ones who organized this. And I'm just going to say this, it was last week. It was 300 of our emerging bilingual students who gathered at Marshall High School, representing 80 languages. It was an amazing gathering. Just walking in the door was amazing. They had motivational keynote speeches, leadership building workshops, college planning workshops, student panel, performances, fashion show, but it was just a truly inspirational gathering. And I, number one, want to just demonstrate the fabulous t-shirt.
Thank you.
But I'm going to say it was such a professional, wonderful gathering, so I wanted to give an opportunity to talk a little bit about it.
Well, thank you. Good evening, board members and Superintendent Smith. It is really a pleasure for me to be able to sit here and share the work that so many departments work on, even though ESL is the lead to this work, but it would not be possible with all the central office departments and especially schools and staff. So I would like to acknowledge their contributions first. So I was going to have a student be here with me, and she called me at 4 o'clock and said that her sister had a baby. So it's not a, like this is like not an excuse, this is true. And so she couldn't be here today. But I did talk to Alexia, who was there all day, and I also thank you for your presence there that day, and that she can share her experience with us as well. So, wow, what was an amazing event, because over 350 high school immersion bilingual from ESL program gathered last Thursday. This is the first annual International Youth Leadership Conference. And as we know, the community put in several leadership conference for Russian, Asian, and Hispanic conference, but never an ESL department or as a school district to sponsor the event, because we need to gather all of our students and really make them feel proud about themselves and about their cultural heritage, and also to empower them in the school. So yes, 80 languages, that was pretty amazing. So, this was an unprecedented opportunity for the EL students to learn and to network with the fellow students, educators, and leaders of color from the greater metro area. So they had an opportunity to meet people, successful people who are from different cultures. So the cultural richness of this event generated and renewed the energy of commitment of everyone involved to strive for a better future and enhance their educational and leadership potential. So 78 students submitted their essays. I read every single one of those essays, and I have to tell you that it was a painful experience, but also a very memorable experience, because it related to my own personal experience when I went to Madison High School. And so it was like reading my own stories. So all the students were highly engaged, and the keynote speakers were amazing. We had Francisco Lopez from Tulsa, Oregon, Lou Retra, the Executive Director of ADU Congo, Dr. Doris McEwen, the Deputy Director, Curriculum Instruction at Oregon Education Investment Board from Dr. Cruz's office, and Taman Waritu, Chief Executive Officer at CNU. So the workshops cover topics of leadership, immigrations, like Superintendent Smith covered, but we also have much more than that. We also talk about race and equity. We talk about how the students can support each other or have other students understand the culture without going through what they call is really humiliation. That's the word that the students use in the essay. Sometimes they feel really humiliated in the classes and in school just because of the language barrier. So I have to tell you that I was in an emotional and believing quadrant the whole day because I see the light and the pride of our emerging bilinguals in this conference. And it's some things that I sometimes do not see as often as we need to see in our schools. So it just made it all worthwhile. So my personal gratitude to all the planning committee members and the departments who have made this happen. This is a true partnership because without all the departments I'm going to list it below, it's not going to be possible. So the ESL department, Interpretation Services, Family Engagement, Community Involvement and Public Affairs, Office of Teaching and Learning, Equity and Partnership, Educational Media Services, Communication Department, and Securities Office. We all were in the planning committees for 3 months before the community the event. So thank you from the bottom of my heart, and especially the staff and the high school principals and the high school directors. They were there on that day to support our students. So thank you. So with that, I would close with Alexia Garcia to see if you can share your experience during the day.
Yeah, so I went obviously not as an ESL student, but I guess more of an observer. And I think if anything, it's like really great to see that we do have this many ESL students in our district. And I think just going to Lincoln, it's a little limiting in that like we're not that diverse. So like being able to see that like our city is really rich in diversity and does have a lot of cultures is like really exciting and great to see. Beyond that, I think, I don't know, it was like empowering to hear from the speakers, and just like I think some students probably really took away from it that like their story is really important, and that like although they're in the United States now, they have like a really great background and like stories to share, and just to be proud of that. So it was exciting.
Well, thank you. And I think, I'd like to end by saying that these, our emerging bilinguals are already the global leaders that we are trying to create with our student body. So we just have to embrace and, really close the opportunity gaps for our students. Thank you
Thank
for
you,
the
Vaughn.
opportunity.
Yeah. And I'm looking forward to this really being the first annual, and that we really do this every year. It was a really inspirational experience. Okay, so Benson, we had 2 teachers at Benson, Katie Meyer and Linda McClellan, who created the Fit to Live and Learn program, which I think will start to be replicated around the district. They were teaching various exercise disciplines like yoga and distance running on the track, and combining that with healthy diet and life decision curriculum, and then working with students to set physical and academic goals and tracking their progress. Their results in the first 3 months have been impressive. They have 240 freshmen who lost a total of 868 pounds, with one student losing 39 pounds. Their endurance has improved, so students cut 300 total minutes from their mile run time, an average of 1.3 minutes per student. More students have earned their PE and health credit this year, and fewer have had discipline referrals. So they're really on fire with this program. They got Nike to now contribute $20,000 and provide a Nike fuel band, which are really cool. If you have not seen a Nike fuel band, it really lets you monitor your activity on your wrist and have it connected to your cell phone, so that they can monitor their
their activity and their exercise for the next quarter. So just wanting to say congratulations to this group of students and to those teachers for pioneering this effort, and we look forward to this show coming on, being featured on KGW this next week. So yahoo, this is a very cool thing. So on Teacher for a Day, I got to go spend the morning in a 4th grade classroom at Vernon School with Stephen Smith, and it was one of my, I will say, all-time most fun mornings that I've had in a long time. It was great with 4th grade math and writing. Actually, we did both. And then following the time with students, and I will say one of the conversations, and I shared this with the Rotary who's with us here today, but one of the students, every time you ask students, so what does the superintendent do and what do you know about what they do? I had this one little girl who's like waving her hand wildly, and she goes, "You're the head of the head of the head of the head of the head." So I thought, well, there you go. This is kind of an interesting. So, but it was really awesome getting to do this. And the Teacher for a Day is something that our Portland Association of Teachers sponsors every year to get elected leadership and business leadership into classrooms and really experience what it's like being a teacher. And it's a really powerful experience, and one, like, we do this with Principal for a Day, and in the last couple years, PAT's been sponsoring Teacher for a Day. So I would just say it's been and school board members, and we take the opportunity to go in and spend the morning in a classroom. So I would just say it's been a really powerful and wonderful experience for us. Following Teacher for a Day, I got to go to Vernon's Rotary and PTA meeting, and we have members of the Rotary here with us, along with Gina Roletto, who's assistant principal at Vernon. And what I wanted to call out is a 3-year partnership between Rotary and Vernon that at this point, this past year, they just issued at the meeting a $12,500 check to help fund the school's music program. And so this has been part of how... So this was the second check in a 3-year commitment to contribute $37,500 to the school to support the music program, and it's a really robust music program. We got to see students perform, but it's been a really tremendous partnership. It's also been a real effort to grow the PTA that went from 3 members to, I'm going to say, was it 150? Is that right? Yes, Talitha, who we can give credit for that, who's sitting here with us in the audience, who's really been part of growing the PTA. So, and I just wanted to say, this is the kind of partnership that really feeds energy into a school, and you really feel the mutuality of this partnership and the energy that's being created between the school community, the Rotary community, and the PTA. So thank you for being with us here tonight and for all you're doing to create a really vibrant and robust support system for the kids at Vernon. We really appreciate it. Lorenzo Poe, who is sitting right straight down the aisle here, who is our Chief Equity Officer, was recognized last week by the Black Parent Initiative and was given the first Dream Keeper Award for his steadfast advocacy for youth in our community and our schools. He was surprised. He didn't know it was coming, and he was we were all thrilled for the recognition given to Lorenzo. So just join us in appreciating his work and his leadership. And finally, this last week, we also launched the executive committee for working on our PPS capital improvement bond. And this is the group that's going to be working with the consultants who are overseeing our visioning process and our ed specs process. That's really the first stage of community involvement in the bond. So we were really excited. The executive committee is 40 community leaders and stakeholders who are working with the consultants to make sure that we're really doing significant outreach and kind of providing oversight for the involvement part of this visioning process. So it was just an exciting moment to kick off. It's our first real out of the planning and into starting to engage with the community around shaping the bond. So we're really excited about that. And Matt Morton is our board representative to that group, I believe. So back to you.
Great, thank you. We'll now move on to our student testimony. Ms. Hewson, my understanding is we have a couple of students signed up.
We have 5. Our first 2, Joseph Justice and Olivia Dean.
As you are coming up, I'm going to read some instructions for public comment. So if you could wait until I finish before you guys start, that'd be great, okay? So our responsibility as a board lies in actively listening and reflecting on the thoughts and opinions of others. The board will not will not respond to any of the comments or questions at this time, but we will follow up on various issues as they're raised. Guidelines for public input emphasize respect and consideration when referring to board members, staff, and other presenters. You have a total of 3 minutes to share your comments. Please begin by stating your name and spelling your last name for the record. During the first 2 minutes of your testimony, a green light will appear. When you have 1 minute remaining, a yellow light will appear. And when your time is up, the red light will come on and give a little buzz. And at that point, we ask that you wrap up your testimony, okay? We sincerely appreciate your input. Thank you for joining us, both you and the other 3 that are coming to testify. You can start. I don't know who wants to go first.
Hello, my name is Joseph Justice, and I'm a 7th grade, Justice, and I am a 7th grader attending Ockley Green. Today, I will be illustrating my vision of an ideal school. An ideal school to me would be one with great staff that takes care of students, and staff that are socially active in a productive and positive way with the students, while still giving a correct amount of discipline and respecting each other. Another thing would be great classrooms. Rooms with motivational posters, bookshelves full of books, and nice desks. Also, a computer lab that has new computers and software that teaches us how to do things that we will do later on in life. Band, art, PE, and drama are good programs to have at all schools. Middle schools especially should have programs like political clubs and woodshop along with the others. Also, services for high school preparations should be applied to get all the middle schoolers ready for high school. Just as an extra thing to say, transportation services should stay open, and I understand how we have budget cuts and how it affects us, but the proposal to end the bus services should be rethought. The bus services are important to all the schools, but what do you guys expect to change? How are you guys going to enforce these changes, and will you guys be, in a way to enforce them, will you guys be sending people into the schools to make sure that the changes are working correctly? The message I'm really trying to get across is basically that the changes have been made and some of them haven't been very well executed, and I think that we should make some great changes and execute them very well. My name is Joseph Justice, and I approve this message.
Thank you, Mr. Justice. It's good to see you again. Okay?
Hello, my name is Olivia Dean, D-E-A-N. At my old school, I was at the highest level they had, and so I couldn't work with my friends. And I was very lonely. I didn't like school. Access is better because I'm not at a level that no one else is at. I have friends I can work with, and I'm always challenged, and I don't get everything right all the time. And I'm not lonely anymore. I love getting lots of challenges with math, science, and reading. I knew it would be hard to leave my old friends behind moving to Access, but it's also really hard for me to come up and talk to all of you because I have sensory processing disorder. And it's really hard to go to transport to places with new people, new things, and new stuff. And I really want Access to stay as a school because I like it a lot. My name is Olivia Dean, D-E-A-N.
Thank you, Ms. Dean. Nice work.
Next, we have Alex Gerald and Emily Volpert.
Anytime you're ready.
Hello, my name is Emily Volpert, Volpert, and I am an editor of the Grant magazine from Grant High School, which each of you should have on your desks. Just 2 years ago, Grant High School was represented by the Grantonian, a flimsy paper which was lacking in passion. It didn't tell the stories of the Grant High School community, and it was a shallow representation of the potential of our student journalism. A Grant parent and former journalist at the Oregonian, Dave Austin, who's sitting behind me, acknowledged the problem and suggested a solution: the Grant magazine, a PSU credit course for seniors and a regular credit course for juniors, freshmen, and sophomore that teaches students real-world skills in journalism. Dave asked us, is the Grantonian good enough? Is this where we want our standard to be? And we decided as a class that it wasn't good enough, and it's not how we wanted it to be. Dave offered to volunteer and teach the class as an adjunct PSU professor, and we decided to do the work. Over the summer, we transformed a storage room into a fully functioning newsroom. We had zero funding from the district, but we made it work. We had the school bought us computers. We went to the PTA, and they bought us printer. We got some support from the boosters, wrote grants, and sold subscriptions in order to support the program. We're truly a grassroots publication, and we're proud of that. Over the summer, we created the first Grant magazine and handed it out on the first day of school. On distribution day, we shocked the student population. It was nothing we'd ever created before in high school. It instilled a confidence in us as a staff. And over the next year and a half, we learned how to do real journalism. Dave brought in professionals from the Oregonian to teach us how to interview, do design and photography, and we created a monthly publication that students, parents, and teachers would want to read and want to have as a representation of Grant High School. It is a product that represents the potential of Grant students and shows the diverse stories of the Grant community. Here's a sneak preview of the one we're working on this issue. It should come out this Thursday, which we're very excited about. But at the beginning of last year, I didn't know how to do journalism. I had no idea. And my first story that I turned in was embarrassing. Sometimes I go back and look at the first draft and think, how could I have possibly turned that in? But at some point, as I struggled through my first few stories, something just clicked. I kind of just got it. And this year, I gained the confidence to lead the class and become one of the editors along with Emma Decker. And we started teaching the underclassmen how the magazine comes together and how to report and do things. And this publication is something that I really, really care about, and I don't want it to die because of a lack of funding. We've created a new concept of media that we're extremely proud of. We would encourage you guys to come see our class at work. We're a newsroom, so we're transparent. Come in any day of the week, and you'll be impressed by our dedication. You'll come into a classroom environment that you've never seen before, because we work like real news people. We just sat down with Oregon's Chief of Education, Dr. Rudy Crew. He visited our classroom to see what we're all about. Can I just finish for 1 second? Okay. He acknowledged the importance...
How much time?
Just 5 seconds.
Okay.
He acknowledged the importance of classes like ours, and he said that he would love to come back and he was proud of us and wanted this to continue. We need assurance that our magazine can continue from support with the district, and we feel that the best way to do that is through CTEA funding. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'm Alexia Garcia. I'm also on the magazine staff. And I'm going to be in her position next year as an editor. And honestly, I'm afraid that we won't be able to continue and improve the program. And just to give you guys a snapshot of my experience there, the first story that I wrote never even got into the magazine. I struggled with every part of it, from the reporting, the writing was pretty horrible. And so that was September. I just finished a 4-page feature story on Portland's Black history. You can check that out. It's going to be in this next magazine or on grantmagazine.com. And so I interviewed 6 African-American Grant alumni and took a real look at gentrification in Portland and was pretty thorough with that. Like I said, you can read that along with any other story that we've ever written is on the website, which is another part that we're really proud of, that we're moving forward with. I also just finished applying for the Al North Journalism Conference in Washington, D.C., which is one of the most distinguished high school journalism programs in the country. And without this program, I wouldn't have been inspired to do that at all. And it's really pushed me to maybe pursue a career in journalism. But not necessarily all of these students, Grant Magaziners, would have to go into journalism because the skills we gain there apply to any career. Writing skills, people skills, the confidence, teamwork, collaboration, communication, meeting deadlines, time management. They're real world skills, and they apply, like I said, to any career. we can't keep this up without funding. We spend the entire first half of the year worrying about how we're going to print the next issue, because throughout the whole year it costs $14,000 just for printing to make these. And we fundraise all of it through subscriptions. We're at every school event at the beginning of the year, flagging down parents and people walking through, community members, trying to sell them subscriptions. And the printing costs money, like I said, equipment costs money. The Otson Foundation gave us a generous grant of $8,000 for technology. We got new video cameras and some other stuff, and that was great. And it takes a lot of people contributing to make this thing happen, and we need your financial support from the district. Parents have supported us, volunteer experts have coming in. Dave Austin sacrifices so much of his time to make this work. Our staff members, everyone sitting behind me. The school, Grant High School, gave us the room and computers. The PTA gave us a printer. Like I said, the Otson Foundation gave us money for equipment. So we're wondering, where's the support from the district? We've been to Susan Jordan, and many of the potential grant ideas she passed along didn't fit our program. But the funds are there. It's federal money. It's there. And so we want to leave you with a question. When was the last time career and technical education courses in Portland Public Schools were evaluated? Could I just finish with one last sentence? You need to find a way to audit the CTE courses in the district. And of course, there's a million reasons why this can't be done, but we've invested way too much in this program to let it fail. Thank you.
I'm sneaking in here, sorry. And I'm only going to be 1 minute because I know I'm not a student. My name's Dave Austin. I'm the Multnomah County Director of Communications, but more importantly, I'm the volunteer teacher of this group of students, and there are some others who couldn't make it tonight. I don't know if I can top what they said. This program is it's just such a benefit to Grant, and it's because these guys do it. I mean, they do the work, they put in the effort, they spend weekends, they spend nights. We get chased out of the school by janitors at 9:45 who have flashlights on because the lights have all been turned out. This program is so important to the community, and we really want to find a way that we can work with the district, partner with the district, and explore this option of getting CTE funding to help us. We don't want, I volunteer. That cost is covered. But what happens is we spend so much time on fundraising. If you think these magazines are good, imagine what we could do if we were able to concentrate full-time on the communications aspect. Not just old-style print journalism, but also new media. So my one ask of you is that we can start a dialogue with the superintendent who's visited our class, that we can start a dialogue with you to find a way to develop. We understand that, and they're actually starting to do the reporting, that there are CTE funds out there. How can we best use those to start a program at Grant? And then I'm going to hold to my promise to you, Superintendent Smith, that we can seed a program like this at other schools in the district. There's no reason that every high school in this city couldn't have a Grant magazine. And I, for one, will continue. I'll re-triple my volunteer efforts to help do that at other schools, train people, work with people, make a true community partnership that we can all be proud of. So I would ask you to consider that. Like these guys, we're journalists, we tend to be pests, so I'll be back to talk to you some more. You might get some calls and emails from them, so I just ask that you hear what we have to say.
Thank you. Very much. Probably goes without saying that not every high school would want a Grant magazine, but they might want their own. I'm just kidding. Thank you all for being here. We appreciate that.
We have one more speaker.
Oh, we have one more speaker.
Yes.
Sorry.
And that's Ketcher Kemmerer.
You can
My
also.
name is Ketcher Kimmer. My last name is spelled Kemmerer. I am a first grader at Access. I want to share why I'm thrilled to be at Access and how so many other students need Access too. I really loved my teacher at Buckman, but after 2 weeks in kindergarten at Buckman, I was so bored I often got frustrated or tired. For example, I got very frustrated with my 4th grade reading buddy because I was at a higher reading level than him. It was like reading to him when he was supposed to be reading to me. My kindergarten teacher tried as hard as she could to give me work at my level, but for most of the day I was not learning anything that was still new to me. It was also hard to find other kids to talk about the things I wanted to talk about. I like Access a lot because I am always learning new stuff. I have friends at my level who can do the same math and who read the kinds of things that I read. I love my homework and how my teachers give me extra challenges. When a subject gets too easy, they move me up to the level beyond. I like that they let me borrow library books on the immune system and other parts of the human body. I am always learning at Access, and I look forward to going to school now. Thank you for making Access a special place for kids. Please find a big space for Access to grow. I am lucky to be at Access, but I know more students need to be there too.
Thank you. Great. Thank you, everybody, for testifying. We're now going to move on to Student Representative Alexia Garcia's report.
So in my report this week, I'd like to address a few questions about the opt-out campaign, give an update about student trips to Salem, and discuss our concerns with Charlie Hale's proposed cuts to youth programs. So first, I'd like to respond to the letter sent out to families in the district by PPS regarding standardized testing. PPS calls standardized tests a key learning tool, something that I would really question. I wonder how these tests measure how well students have learned what they need to know in each subject, when these tests happen in so few subjects. It seems odd that the only things I need to know are math, reading, and writing. Why is science not required? And why are there no history or civics tests? Why do our graduation requirements not line up with these standards? I'm not advocating for more testing or more requirements, just wondering why PPS claims that these tests examines what we need to know when I feel that I've learned so much more and in many ways more important information that is not tested. Beyond that, rarely do these tests relate to what we're learning in class. In junior year, we see students who are in a variety of different science classes. However, they're all expected to take the same science test. Is that really a measurement of what we need to know or how well our schools are serving us? The only way to ensure that students know the information from the test is to take a break from teaching the current course and teach to the test. That's not real teaching, and that's not serving our students. Furthermore, the letter calls for a test these tests a measurement for how well our schools are serving students. It's odd that the district furthers this idea of evaluating our schools based on these scores that have such a high correlation with race and class. Beyond that, study after study shows that there are racial biases built into these tests. This means that in no way are these tests objective, as the letter claims. If anything, they violate our equity policy, as these tests immediately put our students of color at a disadvantage. With that said, these tests do not measure how well our schools are serving students, as evaluating our schools based on test scores that have these biases and high correlations with parents' incomes mean that we'd be just as well off evaluating our schools based on the neighborhood's racial and socioeconomic demographics. I'd take a look at the current state report card. One could line up the schools based on test scores and then line up the schools based on their students' parents' incomes, and the list would look extremely similar. Evaluating our schools based on these scores is absurd, and it asks principals and teachers to be able to overcome conditions outside the classroom that currently inhibit success. In all, I disagree with PPS's view on standardized testing as being a key learning tool. I know there's been quite a concern about schools getting in need of improvement scores on the state report card in regards to enrollment. I find this upsetting as it shows that PPS and various school administrations care more about the test scores and appearance on the state report card than they do about equity and real learning. The fact is, currently people are not moving to Portland because we have an amazing school system. PPS has a 62% graduation rate. Although that may be good for an urban school district, it's not necessarily appealing, nor a statistic that drives people and jobs into our community. Furthermore, I can't imagine that people only look at the state report card when deciding where to live. People look at schools for the programs they offer. Many people visit and tour. Others, like my family, do zero research about the local school and just find a house that locationally works. There are many factors that affect a family's decision to move to a specific place or enroll at a specific school, not just one score on a state report card. If anything, I think that families send their kids to private schools, as most private schools spend their money on maintaining small class sizes and funding programs that directly benefit students instead of spending millions of dollars on standardized testing, the achievement compacts, and the upcoming Common Core state standards. There's also been a lot of discussion about how to best approach the issue of standardized testing. I'd say that sure, it's unfortunate that we will look like all of our schools are failing on the state report card, and sure, there are other ways to advocate for change. However, we need both direct action and conversations with legislators to actually affect change, both of which we are doing through the opt-out campaign and other conversations. We're looking to set up meetings with Governor Kitzhaber, Congressman Blumenauer, and other state representatives. I just got back from Salem with a few students from the PPS and Portland student unions, and I was there last week with a few PPS student union students as well. However, members of Congress are incredibly busy and hear from quite a few people about a variety of issues. The only way for education and standardized testing to become an issue that government officials really take note of is to get media behind us. That is why the campaign is so important. With media attention, it's harder to dismiss us, and politically, legislators can justify their decisions by pointing to a campaign led by their constituents. Both techniques are important and necessary to make political change. If anyone has further questions about the campaign, don't hesitate to ask. You can find the PPS and Portland student unions on Facebook, or email me directly. My email should be on the board website. Beyond just the opt-out campaign, the PPS Student Union has been planning trips to Salem. We are advocating for a few bills that address education, standardized testing, and inclusionary housing. We are also advocating for the Quality Education Commission's recommendation for the higher budget to avoid budget cuts to K-12 education. We've also been tracking Charlie Hales' proposed budget cuts and see that once again, youth are on the chopping block. We're looking at cuts to the Youth TriMet Pass, summer programs, Sun schools, and safety officers in schools. This is upsetting, but to some extent, it's not unexpected. All our generation has seen has been cuts to youth, and this austerity approach to funding public services is not working. We need to be able to fund youth programs, and not at the expense of other programs, but alongside them. This is unfortunate and really upsetting that the conversation has been phrased, we have to cut something, instead of looking to find more ways to fund everything. With that said, the PPS Student Union is looking to set up a meeting with Charlie Hales and discuss how we'll move forth with the budget. And a few other issues that we're currently addressing. So we had a meeting with the Portland Business Alliance about their response to the Race to the Top grant. And although our views greatly vary, it was still a good conversation. And then myself and one other student video chatted with the Providence, Rhode Island Student Union, another group of high schoolers who are challenging their local standardized tests. And it was really exciting to talk to them and cool to hear their stories, and we're definitely going to stay in contact. So, yep.
Thank you. We're now going to... We'll now move on to public comment. Ms. Houston, do we have any signing up for public comment?
Yes, we have two, Ben Jacklet and Betsy Salter.
Okay.
Good evening. My name is Ben Jacklet, and I am the father of an autistic child who attends Alameda Elementary. And my son receives wonderful treatment and education from the teachers and staff at Alameda, and I couldn't be happier with PPS in that regard. However, I have a very strong complaint about the district's special education transportation system. I don't know if you've heard any specific complaints in that area before, but allow me to briefly share my experience, and you can draw some conclusions if you would like from it. In September of 2011, I left my job to homeschool my son. He was having an extremely hard time, and both emotionally and educationally, and I thought I would give it a try. And I tell you, nothing teaches you better how hard it is to teach children than to try to do it yourself with your children. So that increased my respect for all the work that was going into his education. After about 5 months, he wanted to go back to school, and I thought he was ready, and we made the transition. And I continued to drive him to school and to check in with him and to help get him from his school to his after-school care, which is a mile away. It's a short drive, but just checking in with him was a good thing to do. His after-school care is at Fernwood. They have a tremendous campfire program there, and that has been also wonderful for him. This went on for a while, and it was great. And then in January, I was offered a job. And given that I'm a journalist, when you're offered a job, you can't say no. I didn't want to dissuade these young students from getting into the field, but I'm in it. And so I took the job. And no, what do I do with my son? How does he get from point A to point B at 3 o'clock each day? I thought that perhaps we could restart our transportation. That shouldn't be too hard. There's already a bus. There's already room in it. The drivers know him. We've done it before. Let's set it up. Now, it says in the district materials this should take 7 to 10 days, but I'm told it routinely takes well over a month, sometimes months. I have no idea why. No one can explain to me why. I can't fathom why it would take that long. The bus is already going. So here's what happened. We put in the request. I made the phone call. The special ed teacher sent the fax. And I have to say the response from the transportation folks that I got in touch with was just, the customer service was atrocious. And I have no complaints about anything else, but this was particularly bad. It was of the attitude that, man, we can't help you. You would have to call an IEP meeting. Well, anybody familiar with an IEP meeting knows that you need to bring together 5 people with advanced degrees to make that happen.
Can you wrap?
You can't just make that happen. Am I out of time?
Yep. Can you wrap up your comments?
Okay, so to wrap up the comments, what happened was it never happened. It still hasn't happened. And last Wednesday, my father was driving. My father and my mother have been filling in for me and because the district can't help. And my father was driving, and there was a car accident. And the airbags went off, and my autistic son was left in the street. And if it weren't for a good Samaritan woman, I don't know what would have happened. I'm not saying that anybody's specifically to blame for that. I'm just saying that this policy should be re-examined. It's done with fax machines and poor customer service, and our special ed children deserve better.
Thank you.
I'm sorry for that. My name's Betsy Salter, S-A-L-T-E-R, and I'm the mother of a 7th grader at Mount Tabor Middle School. And I wanted to take this opportunity to thank the PPS and Portland student unions for their boycott of the Oaks testing this year. Across the country, school districts, superintendents, legislators, governors are speaking out about how top-down, unfunded mandates of No Child Left Behind, and more recently, No Child Left Behind waivers and Race to the Top competitive grants are further deteriorating the quality of our public education on top of shamefully underfunding our public schools. And I have a list of recent examples and links, which I'll get to by email, but examples of other states where the education leaders are speaking out against these federal mandates that are so detrimental to our public school system. And the states include Maryland, Texas, New York, North Carolina, Washington State, Virginia, Rhode Island, California, Georgia, thanks to our students, right here, Portland, Oregon. And I actually wrote up my testimony a couple weeks ago, but wasn't able to get on the list. And since then, there's been 130 professors in Massachusetts from 20 schools, including Harvard, Tufts, and Boston University. And the Bedford Central School Board in New York have signed the national resolution against high-stakes testing. So, as Alexia mentioned, we were both down in Salem today. Representative Lou Frederick has introduced a bill, HB 2664, and the purpose of that bill is to direct the state to fully evaluate the costs, both financial and opportunity costs, of these standardized tests. And in California, the state superintendent has decided to put a moratorium on state testing for the 2013-2014 school year to give them transition time before the SBAC testing starts in 2014. I'm hoping we can do something like that in Oregon, and that would be a really telling way for us to figure out not just what the state costs are in terms of what we pay out to the contractors who develop the software and provide all the testing prep materials, but all the costs of our state and school district staff that administer the tests and score the tests, and then not to mention the lost instructional time, and because so many of our schools have the computers in the libraries, we lose our libraries and computer labs during testing as well. So thank you, and thank you.
Thank you. We're now going to move on to the next item on our agenda, Jefferson enrollment balancing. After holding several listening sessions and a public hearing, we're now going to be discussing our vote and voting on the Jefferson pre-K-8 enrollment balancing. I'd personally like to thank, and I think we as board members would like to thank, all the community members who have been involved in this process and who participated in the enrollment balancing, either through public comment, written testimony, surveys, a number of different ways. Superintendent Smith, will you please introduce this item?
I will, and I will also reiterate my thanks to people who have participated in this process. It's been a lengthy process and one that many people have participated with since the beginning. And as you know, this is a process that we've been doing across the district over multiple years. This year targeted the Jefferson cluster, and was working to look at schools that were over-enrolled or under-enrolled with the goal of making sure students had access to strong programming. And during the course of the process, numbers of options were put forward that looked at both what happens to strengthen our schools as K-8 models, what happens if we work to build a middle school option in the Jefferson cluster, which many people were desiring, and how did we deal with the school communities that were over and under enrolled, so buildings that could no longer hold the number of students who are attending them, and schools that were too small to actually offer a robust program. Over the course of the process, the options that were presented increased the number of courses or the sizes at individual grade levels. But one of the biggest conversations, I think, and one of the most consistent things we heard in conversations throughout the community was that the level of disruption in the Jefferson cluster was a more significant factor in undermining success of any one of these wholesale changes. So as we were proceeding through the process, looking for options that actually promoted stability in the cluster and stability for school communities ended up playing a more, and this is looking at historic instability in the cluster having been a factor, but so I will say what emerged, and one of the themes that emerged was we need to do something that ends up promoting stability. I think another thing that we heard throughout the process was the desire of individual school communities to have the opportunity to really rebuild enrollment for their schools and have both the framework and support from the district in doing that, and seeing that as a higher value. And then finally, there was a request for us to take a step back and look at some broader district-wide processes like our enrollment and transfer policy, and also boundaries in a district-wide framework as opposed to how we have been approaching it, which has been cluster by cluster. And that the idea of stepping back and doing a boundary conversation or a boundary examination that looked at the entire district might present different opportunities. So given those themes that emerged from the community conversations, the desire for a middle school became one that requires a level of change that is greater than would be consistent with trying to hold stability while we're stepping back and examining the larger issues. So what I am putting forward to the board this evening is a revised and it's slight revisions to the proposal. So you've been seeing a proposal that's come forward and has gone through tweaks as we've continued to engage in conversation and get feedback from the community. But the recitals in the at the preamble to the resolution that the board will consider tonight is actually the revised resolution. I'm going to walk you through this fairly specifically and extract some things that are the specific contents of the recommendation so that you understand what it is, because what the board will actually vote on is a simpler set of statements. So I am going to read you some of what is contained within that recommendation. Community members called for broad district-wide efforts that would impact the enrollment potential for their schools. A review of the student assignment and transfer policies, including the state's new open enrollment law. And second, boundary changes that would not be constrained to specific clusters or sets of schools. So that will translate to a direct recommendation that's part of the resolution. And I'm now on number 9, so I'm jumping through all the historic and just getting straight to the recommendations. Number 9, in response to the community's strongly expressed desire to minimize disruption, the superintendent, myself, is not recommending the cluster-wide school reconfiguration decisions that would be necessary to restore a Jefferson cluster middle school. However, if capture rates and enrollment increase, the district will continue to consider the possibility of providing both a middle school and K-8 options to Jefferson cluster families. So that piece of the recommendation is specifically saying if we're going to focus our efforts on existing school communities and rebuilding those school communities, if there is a point where we're really being successful in building capture rates, we will hit a point where we can also look at the ability to sustain a middle school in the cluster. Our capture rates at the moment are not of a level that we can both do the current K-8s and sustain a middle school, but if we hit a point that we are generating that kind of capture rate, we take a look at adding a middle school. 10, seeking board action to end the Ockley Green K-5 Focus Option Program and consolidate Chief Joseph and Ockley Green to a single K-8 neighborhood school on 2 campuses beginning in September of 2013. The exact grade structure for each campus would be determined as a part of a transition planning process this spring involving both staff and community members. The administrative structure will be consistent with other shared campus schools, which is a single principal and 2 assistant principals overseeing the 2 buildings. A process to determine leadership of the new K-8 school will follow the district's established administrative hiring process and include community and staff input. Part of the process would also include naming the consolidated neighborhood school. Students attending the Ockley Green Focus Option Program currently may choose to remain as part of the newly formed neighborhood K-8, return to their neighborhood school, or may apply to attend King's Pre-K-8 and be ensured a place in an arts-focused program. The staff will also create an implementation team to address the above-mentioned issues, as well as community building, transportation, the school naming process, school identification number, Title I status, student supports, and special education classrooms. This team will also be responsible for the continued monitoring and evaluation of the two-campus model. And I read you that list because many of the issues that are coming up are ones that are about implementation. They're not about the policy decision that the board will make. So there's a list being created of issues that the community has brought forward saying we want to make sure these things get considered. Those will all be ones that would be identified and assigned to an implementation team at the point we have an actual decision. 11, the superintendent, I propose the following program level changes to strengthen and stabilize the Jefferson pre-K cluster schools. 1, ensure that all the schools in the Jefferson cluster are staffed to offer core program requirements for both elementary and middle grades. 2, continue to allocate resources and support for Vernon and King to sustain implementation of the International Baccalaureate programs. 3, develop a sustainable district-wide plan for middle and high school feeder patterns for elementary Spanish language programs and program expansion that would include schools in the Jefferson cluster. 4, work with school communities to determine how to best provide district-level support to raise the capture rate and explore developing and/or strengthening a school-wide thematic focus in schools that do not yet have one, such as the arts, 3 to PhD, environmental education, STEM or STEAM, so the science, technology, engineering, arts, and math, immersion, or IB. So many of the schools in the Jefferson cluster have a theme, but if there is not one, use a thematic focus and support ones that are being generated by the local school community to strengthen program achievement and capture. Building on its recent success, staff will develop a plan with the King School community to increase enrollment in the school as the federal school improvement grant sunsets. Prioritize facilities educational upgrades such as the middle grade science lab at Vernon and other projects covered by the school building improvement bond. Maintain the special education classrooms and autism program at Woodlawn and the intensive skills classroom at King. Continue to provide teaching and learning support to the emerging bilingual students in the Jefferson cluster while engaging in outreach and recruitment efforts for Beach's dual language immersion program to reach the target of 50% native Spanish speakers in that program. Number 12, I'm directing our staff to engage with the Superintendent's Advisory Committee on Enrollment and Transfer, SACIT, to review student assignment and transfer policies, identify opportunities to address broader citywide demographic shifts and boundaries, and expand possible solutions to present enrollment challenges and align with the racial educational equity policy. To continue a site search for a suitable new location for Access Academy, and thank you to students who testified about Access tonight, to ensure a move prior to the start of the 2013-14 school year, and to include an evaluation of program size as part of that process. And then finally, and I referenced this before, but I think it's probably one of the most important features of this whole conversation, work in collaboration with school communities to encourage enrollment growth and outreach to families. So those end up being the specific recommendations, and as I say, separate from that, but including some of the things that I just referenced, are the list that would go to a staff team who become the implementation team to support implementation in the cluster. So a lot of that stuff actually gets outlined in a more specific way for directing how staff then implements. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to the board, who then will walk you through what the actual resolution says.
Great. Thank you. So we'll now consider resolution number 4718. Do I have a motion and a second?
So moved.
Director Gonzalez moves and Director Knowles seconds the motion to adopt resolution 4718. Ms. Houston, is there any public comment?
Yes, we have 5 speakers. Our first 2, Kristen Sheeran and Maxine Dexter.
You can go ahead. That's
Good evening. My name is Kristen Sheeran, S-H-E-E-R-A-N. I'm the parent of a child at Access Academy and president of our PTA. I want to thank Superintendent Smith for including Access and our need for growth in your recommendations before this board this evening. For several years now, we've been working with the district, including Sue Ann Higgins and Judy Brennan, to find a new location for Access. And throughout the process, I'd like to think that our school community has been patient, accommodating, and constructive. The majority of our students take classes in portable classrooms that are now a decade old. Their lunch period is so condensed that parents often find uneaten lunches in backpacks. They take PE outside in all kinds of weather because we don't have access to a gym. Our middle school students take high school equivalent science classes without the benefit of a lab. Generally, our parent community doesn't complain. We understand resources are limited. And we know that despite these limitations, our children are getting something they cannot get at any other school, public or private. If Access never grew, our current students would be fine. So when we ask you to find a location for Access that can enable it to grow over time, please know that we're not asking for our own children. We're asking for other PPS students who need access but who cannot get in because of lack of space. Portland Public Schools has known for years that the need for access exceeds its capacity, and it has done little to reach out to students who qualify. As a result, historically, only those parents with the means to research options or the luck to have come across a teacher or counselor who knew about access have enrolled. This is no way to run a school for alternative education. This is how you produce a majority white, majority middle class program. Our parent community and principal have worked hard over the last several years to change this and remove the systemic bias in whom and how one applies for access. And as a result, our applications have climbed significantly, particularly from underrepresented communities across Portland. We're doing our part. We ask you now to do yours. It's with a heavy heart that I listened to members of this board a few weeks ago vocalizing some of the greatest misperceptions about access. It's clear that you don't know our students. Please come and meet them. I promise that when you do, you will never again question whether these kids' needs could be met by a neighborhood tag program. You will never again imply that these kids are privileged. Being born with an intellect that is out of sync with more than 99% of the population, being born with an intellect that is out of sync with your own physical and emotional development is actually a burden, not a privilege, in an inappropriate educational environment. I love and admire my son, but there isn't a day that goes by that I'm not reminded of how much easier and perhaps happier his childhood would be if he had been born somehow less gifted. Access works because it helps children like my son carry these burdens. It works because it provides them with a nurturing community where they can relate to their same age peers. And it works because it helps them develop their natural born proclivities into lifelong assets. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Robert Dexter, D-E-X-T-E-R. My wife was going to speak, but it wasn't clear that she could get here tonight, so I was going to share some of her words with you. And you may find that some of my thoughts and comments echo some that you have just already heard. I'm a parent of 2 children at Access Academy. After participating in many meetings through the Jefferson rebalancing, it has been clear that there are significant misperceptions among people in this room about what access is, and I would like to directly address some of these misperceptions. One issue raised was whether it was appropriate to have our children in a separate school that takes them out of their community schools. Our school is for children whose neighborhood school has been unable to serve their needs, and thus they need an alternate learning environment. Often it has been too difficult to differentiate the curriculum adequately for our kids, leading to the school or the parent suggesting that an alternate situation is needed. But by the time this occurs, it is usually the case that that child has become marginalized, bullied, and/or ignored. They are aware that they are different, but they often don't have the maturity or insight to understand why that means that they're being treated differently. Yes, these are children who score in the 99th percentile on standard testing, but it is their inability to assimilate well or to belong in the classroom that leads to them developing problematic behaviors, social and emotional issues that make them unable to stay in their usual environment. It is due to these issues that Access has 75 families on the waiting list from last year and many more that are visiting us currently. The tragic thing is that these are only the parents who are aware of their child's plight, able to advocate for them, and are even aware of Access as an alternate option for their children. There are many more out there. Another issue was the lack of perceived diversity at our school. To paraphrase one of your esteemed members, Martin Gonzalez, not all the geniuses in the school district are white. And we agree with that. In fact, 35% of our current students are students of color. However, this number is not higher because our growth has been stunted for years due to lack of district investment in and support for the school and by our location. By keeping us from growing, you are both excluding interested families and not allowing for expansion of our reach to families who may be less enabled and less informed. You are putting selective pressure on enrollment to prioritize parents who are able to advocate for and apply for their students. As you must know, this largely excludes ESL and economically challenged families. I suspect that there is a lack of feeling of responsibility for this to some degree, and if I'm correct, please reassess your role in this inequity. Access Academy is a vital school. It serves our children with special needs, which have not been able to met in their community schools.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have Kathy Kemmerer and Margaret Eidinger.
You can go ahead and start. Thank you.
Thank you very much for hearing my testimony. I apologize that I'm reading from a paper, but English is not my native language. I came from Germany about 11 years ago. I have a daughter who is 12 years old at Access Academy, and I would like to just give a testimony for it. We moved to Portland from Cleveland, Ohio in summer of 2009. My daughter Christina entered Bridal Mile Elementary School in 5th grade. She had been tag identified since the first day in school here in Portland because of the test scores she brought with her from Ohio. We were waiting for any tag activity, but nothing ever happened. It was very confusing. At Bridal Mile, it took her 18 months to learn anything new in math. The difference between being tag identified in a public school in a Cleveland suburb and tag identified in a public school in Portland. My daughter has many behavioral issues, long-standing since kindergarten. She's very difficult to deal with, which I can attest to as single mother. However, at Bridal Mile, things got worse. Despite well-meaning staff, she was bored, felt made fun of, was even more disruptive in class than before, and also got depressed. She has a therapist. Access was a true lifesaver. I don't know what we would have done if the great Bridal Mile principal hadn't talked to us about Access. It is unbelievable what Access has done for my daughter. This is honestly the first school where she feels she belongs to, and where she started to make good friends who understand completely how she feels all the time, every day. She hated going to school. Now she hates vacation days and long weekends. What an awesome transformation. I would like to point out that in my view, Access is much more than an elitist school. It is a therapeutic institution. And I think we need these, especially with the recent happenings in Connecticut. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
My name is Kathy Kemmerer, Kemmerer. You heard earlier from my son, Ketcher, about what Access means to him as a first grader. I'm here to share a story from the parent perspective and to advocate for a physical space for Access that recognizes the unique value and will allow Access to grow. Ketcher entered kindergarten at Buckman, reading chapter books, writing detailed narratives in his various journals, adding and subtracting, and with an early grasp of multiplication and division. You heard him mention he quickly became bored and was particularly frustrated when his 4th grade reading buddy mispronounced words. And what he didn't share is how he unfortunately responded. He threw the book at his reading buddy and he hid under a table and he refused to come out. And that 4th grade reading buddy had a little brother in Ketcher's class who witnessed this, along with his 4th grade classmates. And this type of situation only added to Ketcher's struggles to make meaningful connections with his peers. and he exhibited increasing social anxiety over the weeks. His teacher was creative and struggled to challenge Catcher. He didn't want to be separated because he already felt like the odd kid out, so he sat quietly with his classmates while they reviewed sight words or basic addition, and he began withdrawing on the way to school. And by Thanksgiving, he was suspended after an incident in which the stress became too much, and he kicked the teacher and pinched the principal. We worked with a developmental pediatrician and a play therapist to improve Catcher's capacity to more constructively navigate his frustrations. We kept him home for all or part of the day if we felt like he was going to be prone to misbehavior. My husband met Catcher for lunch and recess, and he volunteered in the classroom on Thursdays. And we saw great improvement, yet Catcher still ultimately ended the year with 13 late starts and 15 absences, which is 16% of the academic year. And my husband and I had no idea how we would get Catcher through another year of 30-hour weeks in a classroom environment that was so completely lacking in meeting his academic and social needs. Access immediately transformed his school experience at every level. Within 3 weeks, he engaged with his peers in ways we had not seen by the end of the year at Buckman. Other 6-year-olds who, like him, borrow books on the immune system and the Oregon Trail. He thrives on spelling words and definitions and complicated math patterns, and he's passionate about the Nobel Peace Prize laureates and aquatic ecosystems. He finally genuinely looks forward to going to school and doing his homework, and he's not missed a single hour of school this year, and he's not had any significant behavior issues. So his story is similar to that of every child at Access. Last year alone, about 70 kids like Catcher, though, weren't as lucky and are on the wait list. And I can't adequately convey how thankful I am to PPS for establishing Access and supporting Access. There's simply no other option like it. And I appreciate the constraints you're facing, but as you weigh the difficult choices, please choose physical space for Access that will allow it to grow. Thank you.
Thank you.
And lastly, we have Nicole Dean.
Hi, my name is Nicole Dean. It's D-E-A-N. Thank you for giving us this opportunity to talk to you. I am the very proud mother of Olivia, who came up here to talk to you. And I, like Kathy, am going to tell you why Access has been such an incredible gift to our family. Olivia, we've always known she was just a little different. So when she finally went into kindergarten, we were lucky to have a teacher who would give her extra to do. Unfortunately, that wasn't a good social fit for Olivia. She really was just lonely. So lonely that she would just withdraw because she had to do reading by herself, she had to do math by herself, and she would see her other friends only at recess, and that's not a way for a child to grow up, being isolated. So she finally came to us right before Halloween because she didn't want to go to school anymore. It wasn't fun. She wasn't enjoying learning. She didn't want to be a part of something that she could only do part-time. And we had no idea what to do at this point. We were at a loss. She was tested, tag testing upon recommendation from a teacher friend in an older grade. And we were shocked to find out that she was as high as she was. And we were also shocked to learn that there was a school for kids that qualified in this area. And having a child with sensory processing disorder is a whole other gambit on top of things. Transitions are really hard, and it took her 4 months just to really make friends to begin with, that the thought of moving her again was pretty heart-wrenching. But I already had a child who hated going to school, who only wanted to be there to play at recess and then just wanted to come home because she wasn't really doing anything at school that she couldn't do on her own at home. We've been so incredibly grateful for the experience. She has peers she can talk to and work with during table work and on projects, and they can communicate and understand. And because of what the differentiation from the teachers, they're able to delve so much deeper that she's actually getting a world and community view that was not available to her at her normal school. And for that, we're grateful as well, because we're all in it together, and I think that they're really good at producing that and showing the kids that. I worry, like the others, that there are children who are just perfectly normal, regular kids, just bright, who are sensory processing disorder kids and autistic and Asperger's, that are missing connecting with school and with their peers and having social issues because there's parents that don't understand the program is out there. And I feel it's not just our responsibility as parents of the school and administrators to go out and reach these people, which we're willing to do, but it's also important for PPS in general to reach out to every parent with a child that tag tests. I don't care their socioeconomic background.
Thank you.
I don't care what school they're at. I'm sorry if them leaving takes away money from the neighborhood school. It's about the kids.
Thank
and
you.
it's about making it good for them.
Thank you. We'll now move on if there's any board discussion about Resolution 4718.
So the only place we really address access is in just the directing staff to, okay.
Mhm.
I don't know if it would be helpful to just quickly read the resolution itself, because it's fairly short, and just to have that be in the record.
Sure.
It pretty much says it, I feel.
Would you like to do that?
Okay. So the resolution part begins, number 1, the board accepts the recommendation forwarded by Superintendent Smith to end the Ockley Green Focus Option K-5 program and consolidate Chief Joseph and Ockley Green to a single K-8 neighborhood school that will operate on both campuses beginning in September 2013. 2, the board acknowledges and appreciates the parents, teachers, students, community members, and neighborhood association representatives who have provided vital information and feedback throughout this process. It is clear that the Jefferson community's strong support for its neighborhood schools offers us a tremendous opportunity to work together to build strong, sustainable, and high-performing schools that prepare every student well for high school and college. 3, the board directs staff to work with the Chief Joseph and Ockley Green communities to develop implementation plans for student and staff transitions that support families. 4, the board directs staff to develop and recommend a process for a comprehensive review of school boundaries district-wide and policies related to student assignment and transfer to better align with the racial educational equity policy and promote strong capture rates in academic programs at every grade level. And finally, 5, the board directs the superintendent or staff to brief board members in June 2013 on the steps that are being taken to strengthen middle grades programs in Jefferson pre-K-8 cluster schools, the implementation of the consolidation and the review of policies. The board further directs that the superintendent or staff provide status updates in the fall and spring of each year for the next 3 years to monitor progress on the implementation of this resolution.
Thank
Just
you.
want to make sure that
Thank
was
you.
in the record.
Discussion?
I was going to mention that I think many of us helped the superintendent work through and come up with this resolution. So if the community's not seeing us, jumping on and trying to make changes, it's because we've kind of collaboratively worked on this throughout this whole process. So I want to thank you, Superintendent Smith, for taking in all of that and getting to this place. And I really also want to thank so many people in our community who stepped up and participated, and sometimes very passionately. And I especially appreciate that because it tells me how much you care about your kids, and it tells me how much you care about public schools in general and neighborhood schools. And it's important for us to see that passion and work with you. I had a little quote in the Oregonian this morning that I thought that this resolution was responsive to the community, but it wasn't necessarily that satisfying. I think there's a lot of pieces of it that feel good, but I think there's also several pieces that are unfinished business, including access, and really including King's low enrollment. We still have a school improvement grant from the federal government that's going to help us through next year. But clearly there's more work to be done because that school community is still too small for us to offer a robust program after that. So I am encouraging folks in the Jefferson community to stay engaged with us, and I think that we've put many things in this resolution that will allow us to get kind of frequent updates on progress. So I mostly want to just thank everyone for being involved and engaged in this process to the extent that you were. So thank you very much.
I'll start with given that I think that we heard some comments from Access, and I was actually quoted and quoted correctly, unlike some of the stuff that we get quoted sometimes in the newspapers. And I'm glad that the person that actually quoted me actually agreed with the statement. So for that, I think I'm thankful. What I do want to is apologize for the impact of my words in regards to offending, parents that I think I stated have a right to advocate for the best education they can get for the children. I think none of us are, here, I think in our deliberations have argued against that and have actually opposed that. I think that there is a value in us as parents, in my case, parent and grandparent, becoming more organized to advocate better and more effectively for our students. And I'm glad to hear in the statements that were made by Access parents, the care and the concern also for other children that, whose families are also looking for a solution. Years ago, some of us were in the Student Achievement Committee, and the discussion was, being presented in regards to the challenges that pose in regards to the siting of Access with Saban and the limitations that space had. My comments, I think, in the context of the discussion last time, have a lot to do with the fact that I believe and I still hold that King was not the solution. So I think that's, I'm glad that the district, as a district, we are responding more effectively to the needs of students in that way. My daughter was also identified when she was at Beach Elementary School as a tag student, and I don't remember ever having any services provided to her in that sense other than the regular classroom experience. So I'm glad that there is improvement and that people feel, I think, positive about that result, and hopefully in this process we'll get to look at finding a space that'll be suitable. Mind you that sometimes that struggle takes a little while. Creative Science School was one of those too that took a while, and but they got their school now, right? What I think, I want to thank in particular Director Atkins and who was the in essence our wordsmith in many ways in our leading editor and questioner in terms of the resolution, in terms of the language of it, and in that way, and also Director Morton in that way, because I think because of their work in particular, I think that we have a much better resolution before us. There are many things that are missing, as people would argue in regards to this, because it does not necessarily capture every little bit that we heard, out there from people. It does not mean that those things go away. In particular, I'm reminded of some of the statements that were made last time that we were at Ackley Green with the Latino parents, Vietnamese parents, and one African American mother that was present. And one of these things they should stress, and it's something that I think the community has stated for a long time, is that it's more than just making changes in regards to moving students from one place to another. It is about having strong academic programs in those schools. It is also, what I hear from folks in the community is having the staff before the students that have a proven, track record of improving the performing of the students, and the appropriate leadership in those school buildings to lead that effort. So, those things, although not spelled out in this thing, are some things that I believe staff would also values and is going to follow up on. So I want to thank my colleagues for their work in regards to making this thing an improved version.
Can I just ask one more question? How temporary is the two-campus merge? So like the two-campus setup, is it going to result in a closure, or is that still part of the conversation?
So at this point, it's not resulting in a closure.
Okay.
It's a single neighborhood K-8 that is now located on 2 campuses. So, and then we'll establish what the grade configuration is, but it's not framed as a temporary solution.
Okay. And I think that's
Which is a change from what the original proposal was, which was to ultimately get transition towards all being located on the Ockley Green campus. And then the last round of conversations was, okay, keep both campuses and work on a grade configuration that lets us utilize both campuses.
I think that's part of the reason that the 3-year monitoring and oversight is in there, so that we can make sure that we build into our schedule and is transparent to the community when we do so, to evaluate how is it going, how is enrollment, how are efforts to grow enrollment going, what is the status of the changes to the transfer policy and so forth. So we're going to keep on this issue. It's not going to go away with this resolution.
Director Morton or Knowles?
Yeah, thank you. I think I won't speak about specifics, but more generalities, and I know how that bothers some people, but so I apologize. But I think in general this resolution is, although not completely satisfying, because so much of it relies on our implementation and how well that goes and how we partner with our community in that. I think it also represents some new values that we now have an opportunity to demonstrate in the review of policies that our district has that I don't think anymore reflect either the reality of our district being a sort of growing enrollment district and really the reality of how we'd like to address racial equity, racial educational equity in the district. So I like that as a new opportunity here for us. I also like some of the new values that we're talking about in working with the community in this. So on several occasions, this resolution talks about engaging staff and community. And I think that's really important. Again, it comes down to how we're going to implement that. But I think that is a really good first step for us as a district to express that value. I think, too, this is important, and particularly around the King, the comments about King and how we address concerns before they become issues. All of us know that this SIG grant is ending. All of us have an opportunity now to address what are the concerns that we're going to be facing, what are the issues we're going to be facing when that happens. So right now we should be working on that solution so we can maintain the momentum that school has experienced during this funding process. And that's a new value that I think this resolution is sharing with us. And then too, this might not be new, it feels kind of new to me, but it's really creating a structure around accountability and providing dates. And here's where us those of us who are passing this resolution are going to be responsible for hearing about this and beginning to make decisions and asking questions and holding the superintendent and the staff accountable to it. It's also a really great opportunity for us to, as a reminder, to re-engage community when we're not seeing the progress that we know we need to see in order to overcome some of these issues that again, we know we have. So I think it's again, not entirely satisfying because of some of the work that we still have to do. This isn't the end by any means. It's much more of a beginning, but also I think a really fantastic expression of what our new values are, and I'm excited about the opportunity that we have now to move forward with the community in creating solutions for the issues that we see.
You've said it so well, everybody, so I just won't say much more except really to thank the staff who worked so hard during months of a really arduous and challenging process, and the superintendent for her leadership and her staff in kind of getting us to this place, which I think, I agree with what everyone has said. This is a starting point. We have the follow-through and implementation to do in working with the community, or as the resolution, which you were very kind, Co-Chair Gonzalez, to give me such credit, but really this is the staff's work, which we all just helped a little bit in tweaking, but it's their words. And what they say, when we say working together to change the story in the Jefferson cluster, that's really the heart of this, as well as our piece and the resolves that we are going to follow up and have that oversight and monitoring for the next 3 years. Or beyond as needed, but for sure for the next 3 years. So I just wanted to thank everyone at the district who was involved in bringing us to this point, and of course the community for hanging in there for what has been a really tough process, and for just the energy that I'm really excited about now that we can be working together in a positive way to strengthen schools for kids and make sure that everybody in the Jefferson cluster and across the district has a great experience despite all the challenges that we face. So just appreciate everybody's hard work.
So I think that everybody's pretty much already said the things that I would have to say about the resolution. I think that it has been a really long slog, I think, on this one. 6-7 months of community meetings. I'm hopeful that in the future we can find a better way to engage our community in a shorter period of time, not to cut off community input, but to find a better way so that we're not exhausting both the community and ourselves over when we're trying to make these so important decisions. And like everybody else, I'm not particularly satisfied with the outcome. But that's not because I don't think it's a good outcome. I do. I think it's more because of all the work that everybody put in, and it seems like it's a very small tweak to what we've done. But on the other hand, I'm very hopeful for what's going to be happening in the future. This is just the beginning again, and I'm looking forward to the work that we're going to do on both the transfer policy and on the boundaries. It's been work that I've looked at since I first started on the board 3.5 years ago, so I'm very excited that we are going to be moving forward with that. And I'm very supportive of the resolution. I was very aware as we were going through the whole process about the concern of stability in the Jefferson cluster, and it was a big worry for me. And so for that reason, I again, although I'm not satisfied with it, I think it's a good decision for us. Also helps relieve the overcrowding at Chief Joe and the under-enrollment at Ockley Green, and I think those are all, I'm very hopeful for both of those schools, especially as they move into this transition and this collaboration between the two, that they're both going to come out being even stronger schools after they work through this transition. But I think that one of the things we have to be very concerned about or watch as a district and as a board in support of those two schools is the kind of supports that we provide for them to help them make it through this transition. And I'm talking staffing support, community support, all the things that are in this resolution. They're on the paper. I'm just want to make sure that we truly track those things and make sure that we're giving those two schools one school, every single chance for success that we possibly can, because it's very important. And then finally, I'm also very anxious and interested in what we're going to do with Access, because I think it's a wonderful program for students who really have special needs, and I think that that's the way that we should approach this program. They're very special students, and we need to make sure that they're provided with the education that they need, like all of our other students here in the district. So overall, I'm very excited about what we're about to do and looking forward to the challenge. So.
Great. Any other comments? Before we move on? Okay. Before we get to a vote, I'm just going to mention that if there are people here that are just for this resolution and you decide when we voted you're going to move out, just a reminder that sometimes people hang out in the back and they discuss and they're like, hey, can you believe? Voices carry really well and it becomes really difficult for those here to hear. So we have people usually that try to remind people, but it always feels a little uncomfortable kicking people out of a public space. But we are trying to finish the rest of our business, so thank you. So we'll now vote on Resolution 4718. All in favor, please indicate by saying yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yes. All opposed, please indicate by saying no. Resolution 4718 is approved by a vote of 6-0 with Student Representative Garcia voting
Yes.
yes. Thank you. At our January 28th board meeting, a first reading was held on the proposed uninsured, underinsured motorist policy. After more than 21 days of being open for public comment and receiving none, we are now ready to vote on the proposed amendments. So we will now consider Resolution 4719, uninsured, underinsured motorist insurance coverage and personal injury protection coverage, Policy 8.60.023-P. Do I have a motion and a second? Director Adkins moves.
Second.
Director Gonzalez seconds. Seconds the motion to adopt Resolution 4719. Ms. Houston, is there any public comment?
No.
Thank you. Is there any board discussion about the resolution?
I just wanted to thank our Chief Financial Officer, Neil Sullivan. I had several questions on this today because I wasn't here during the original discussion of this, and so I really appreciate you walking me through it.
Thank you. With no questions, we'll now vote on Resolution 4719. All in favor, please indicate by saying yes.
Yes.
All opposed, please indicate by saying no. Resolution 4719 is approved by a vote of 6-0 with Student Representative Garcia voting
Yes.
yes. Now we're going to move on to open enrollment participation for 2013-2014. Each year, we as a board must vote on open enrollment participation per Oregon House Bill 3681. Superintendent Smith, would you like to introduce this item?
Yes, and actually I'll introduce Judy Brennan, who's going to walk us through what this item is. And Judy is the director of our Enrollment and Transfer Office, as you are aware.
So as you said, this is an annual responsibility of every district in the state of Oregon. Oregon House Bill 3681 provides a different opportunity for schools to accept students from other districts. PPS follows the traditional or standard process, which is student by student, based on capacity and for 1 year at a time. Open enrollment allows you to accept a group of applicants from other districts. If you have more applicants than space, you have to run a lottery. You also have to give your students within your district first access to those seats before you can take any students from out of the district. If you accept those students, their resident district no longer has the right to either approve or deny students' entry into your district. Students can also stay through the highest grade, through 12th grade, with no additional approvals along the way. So those are the bones of what the House bill offers. This is the second year that you're being asked whether to allow open, or whether to participate in open enrollment or not. The House bill allows you to opt out. Last year, it was superintendent's recommendation and your agreement to opt out. You did ask us to monitor what the results of that was, and we got the results of that monitoring to you rather late, I regret to say. 132 students were approved to other districts through the House bill last year. That was a combination of students who had already been approved by PPS. So these are kids who live in our boundaries, but perhaps had moved to another place, had moved into our district partway during the school year, and we had given them permission to remain in their current district to the highest grade. Under House Bill 3681, they can now stay through 12th grade if they applied and were approved. It also includes students who live in Portland Public Schools, had never received an interdistrict request to go elsewhere, but were perhaps paying tuition in another district. So those are the types of different circumstances that we saw with those 132 students. Despite that number, and despite the fact that we didn't have any reciprocal amount because we didn't take in students through open enrollment ourselves, we did continue to receive significantly more students coming into our district with approval from their resident district under the standard practice than consistent with what we've had in past years. So the number coming in is still significantly higher than the numbers going out. And because of that, particularly because in the context of these broader enrollment decisions that we are now on the cusp of facing, it seemed incongruous to look at open enrollment, which necessitates allowing more intra-district transfers before you ever get to the inter-district transfers. At this time, it didn't seem logical. So once again, staff is recommending that you opt out. It's a year-by-year process, and will be incorporated based on the resolution that you just passed in our further discussion of enrollment and transfer policies and district-wide boundaries.
Thank you. We'll now consider Resolution 4720, House Bill 3681, open enrollment participation for the 2013-2014 school year. Do I have a motion and a second?
So moved.
Director Morton moves. Director Adkins seconds. The motion to adopt Resolution 4720. Ms. Houston, is there any public comment on this resolution? No. Is there any board discussion on the resolution?
Yes. Good. So I sent a email out to Judy and some of the folks, Carol and some others, this afternoon. I'm not sure if all of you saw it or not, so I thought I would just share some of my thoughts about this. So I think in terms of tonight, I can go along with the open enrollment declaration for this year. But I would ask that we do some pretty serious analysis in the coming year before we're asked to approve it again. I think it's important for us to understand who is opting to use this law, who is opting to leave. The question I would have is whether it's, you know, the usual suspects. Is it affluent students? Is it white students? If we look at the table that we received, you can see that we're losing some students to Beaverton, Lake Oswego, Riverdale. That would probably indicate maybe that's the case. I don't know. But the largest population of students of Portland students are actually going to David Douglas. And so for that group, do we have any sense of who those students are, why they're transferring? Are they former Marshall students that we aren't serving well? I just don't feel like I have any of those answers as we're being asked to look at this tonight. This year we had an increase of 54% in the number of students transferring out of Portland Public Schools compared to a year ago. I don't think we're terribly concerned about that because we still have way more transferring in. But I would question what the long-term projections or implications are of this if we decide to continue to opt out of open enrollment. So for the record, I hate open enrollment. I don't think it's a good policy for the state to impose on us. I think it pits district against district. I don't particularly think that's healthy. And I believe that one reason that we're choosing not to participate in open enrollment is generally because we believe it might exacerbate what's already happening with our own current enrollment and transfer process. However, if that's what the state law is doing now, at some point, do we optimize our losses by opening up transfers at some of our lower enrolled schools? I just don't know that we've had a deep discussion about any of this. I would also ask whether there's been any serious analysis of the impact of the law at the state level, whether the Oregon School Board Association, COSA, the administrators group, whether the Oregon Department of Education, has anybody done any kind of analysis as to the impacts of the laws, who are the winners, who are the losers. So one of the things I was happy about is in the Jefferson resolution that we just passed, when we're talking about a review in the coming year of our student assignment and transfer policy, we have included in that also a review of the state's new open enrollment law. So thank you for including that. And I guess the main thing is, again, I'm fine voting with this tonight, but I don't want to be in the position next year where this is given to us with so little analysis and discussion about whether we should be doing something different. So that would be what I would ask for the future. Thanks.
Any other comments? Okay. So we'll now vote on Resolution 4720. All in favor, please indicate by saying yes.
Yes.
All opposed, please indicate by saying no. Resolution 4720 is approved by a vote of 6-0, with Student Representative Garcia voting
Yes.
yes. We are now going to move on to our capital bond overview. This is the third of 5 overviews that we will receive in the next few months on the capital bond. I'd like to note that our agenda indicated originally that the topic would be budget and financing this evening, but it will actually be about engagement. So Superintendent Smith, can you introduce this item?
Yes, and I'll introduce CJ Sylvester, our Chief Operating Officer, and Jim Owens, Director of School Modernization, who will walk us through this next installment.
As the superintendent indicated, my name is CJ Sylvester. I'm Chief Operating Officer for Portland Public Schools. And next to me is Jim Owens, the Executive Director for the Office of School Modernization. And to my far right is Matt Shelby, who's the Public Information Officer for the Communications Department here at Portland Public Schools. Chair Belisle indicated that this is, in fact, the third of 5 presentations that we're doing as a program overview for the 2012 voter-approved bond. It is engagement. We do have an engagement framework that has been established here at Portland Public Schools that is intended to support authentic, consistent, and equitable community engagement. And one thing I want you to think about as we're going through this overview tonight is that the bond program is a bit different than other kinds of engagement that have occurred in the school district in the past. And there's 2 parts to that. One is that we will be having a communications staff that is responsive solely for bond-related communications. So there's going to be significant efforts, some of which Matt Shelby will be talking about in overview form, in terms of the level of detail that's available to the community, to neighborhoods, to schools, and to anyone else who may be interested about the nature and extent of the ongoing work on a daily basis once, for instance, we get under construction, we're in the design process. The other part is that we will be working collaboratively with design teams. So when we're talking about having community design processes, they're facilitated by design teams and supported by district staff who are proficient in doing this kind of work. So that's just a little bit a little different than some of the facilitated things that the district has done in the past, where staff has been doing the facilitation. In fact, what will happen, and as Jim will indicate, even with the facilities visioning and ed specification process, is that we do have design teams who have done this any number of times with prior school districts, assisting the community in coming to conclusion about what it might look like to have a 21st century learning environment at their particular school. So the various processes will, depending on which process they are, go from informing, or consulting to involving or collaborating. And then, of course, we've got the topics that we're going to be touching on tonight, albeit briefly because it is an overview and we want to be able to get to your questions and answers. And the three of us will be available to answer any questions you may have.
So I'm going to test this. Or you can use this.
Ooh.
Ouch. It's painful. I'll lean forward. So on the communications plan, I mean, really the goal is to continue the community engagement that really led up to, that helped inform the development of the long-range plan, that helped create the actual bond package, that led to the eventual passage. I mean, it was quite a bit different than the last time we went forward in May of 11. Basically, we're looking to close the loop with the community. We started a conversation. It was years in the making that led up to the passage of the bond. And we want to do that by keeping the community informed on the status of school improvement projects. We want to keep them informed about alignment of spending to budgets and priorities, facilitating input and engagement of students, families, community, and staff. And we want to document and share the work of the bond accountability and other committees. This work will take shape in a variety of ways, really web-based, printed, and face-to-face, kind of all of the above. Really, our bond webpage will serve as the central location where we'll post really the most up-to-date information, updates on bond timelines and status reports and pictures and videos of the projects, FAQs, things that come up, construction glossary. We'll also hit social media with the development and the maintenance of a bond Facebook page that'll tie with our district Facebook page so that people that are in that sphere can stay up to date as well. Obviously, we'll post regular media updates, but beyond the kind of general mainstream media updates, one of the things that we're going to do is do some more targeted kind of pre-written updates for some of the more neighborhood-centric papers, especially papers that serve communities that are seeing a lot of work. So we want to make sure we're doing monthly updates in those monthly community papers as well. We'll also be doing kind of a monthly standing feature in the PPS Pulse, the online newsletter that goes out district-wide, as well as organizing tours and open houses, and those have really already started, kind of looking at the current conditions of our buildings, also as we get closer to design phase, really ramping those up. And then really meeting people where they are. So presentations at neighborhood, business associations, parent groups, that's really where we're going to get some more of the face-to-face interaction. And special emphasis to the neighborhoods and the communities that are seeing major work. We anticipate they're going to have lots of questions. If the level of questions and emails and media questions that we've received so far is any indication, there's definitely a hunger out there for information, and we expect that's going to ramp up as we get closer. And then in addition, signage, more basic things like signage on the construction site signs, letting people know what's going on, sending out leaflets to the neighbors, letting them know when they're going to see say increase in traffic and things like that. So really the communications plan is kind of that overall umbrella where some of the more specific engagement opportunities will kind of come up underneath to support that plan. And Jim can talk about some of the more specific opportunities that our community is going to have to help shape the implementation. All right, thanks, Matt, and good evening. I'm going to walk us through the next several slides to highlight some of the stakeholders, some of the groups that we're planning to establish to be involved in the bond work. And I'm going to start with the stakeholders, which you have up on the screen and in your board packages, and try to describe the multiple levels of engagement that these groups will be participating in. And we'd like to differentiate in terms of participation in the different forums, all the way down to the project level. Certainly as we look across these stakeholders, I think these are all groups that
the district routinely works with on a number of different levels. And relative to the work that we're about to engage in, we're starting our educational specification process that actually begins with educational facilities visioning. Sorry. How's that better? And with that effort, we'll deliver a summary of what our schools will look like, particularly the ones that are going to be subject to full modernization or replacement. Secondly, we'll be talking about groups that are specifically focused on individual projects, specifically our 3 high schools, Roosevelt, Franklin, and Grant, and then the replacement of Fabian K-8. And then finally, our 6 master plans. We don't want to lose sight that we've got the other 6 high schools that are going to be involved in a very engaged process to look at what their master plans will be for future bond consideration. So in looking at the educational facility visioning and specifications, last Wednesday we kicked off the meeting of our Executive Advisory Committee, which is a 30-plus person group that represents our diverse community. And we spoke with them about how we're planning to engage a variety of groups to maximize input in terms of how our facilities support program and curriculum delivery. It's very much of a differentiated engagement process, and we're anticipating getting voices from the community that we don't traditionally hear from. So we're really going to be working hard on that, and that effort will take us through the mid part of April. Students and teaching community will also be participating in this effort. Again, we're looking for maximum participation, as well as district operations staff. As we move into the second phase of this work, the EdSpec document itself, we're looking for something that will allow us to define what it is our schools look like, and that will inform our design teams as we get started with specific projects. As we complete this work, the EdSpec itself will be used not only for the high schools in this bond and Fabian, but it will also inform future schools in future bond measures. So a real important source document that'll be a very overarching one. Next is our design advisory groups, or DAGs, and these are customized teams that will actually be comprised of community members and of different staff that will be unique to each of the communities. So there will be separate ones or different ones for each of the high schools and for Fabian. So we're expecting to have 4 of these design advisory groups in place. And we're actually looking at putting them in place as we begin master planning. You may recall that in our plans for the 3 high schools in Fabian that we want to spend time master planning the entire site. And so we will have our design professional board, our architect, planner, and they will be working with staff and with these design advisory groups to ensure that we're getting community input as it's customized or tailored to that specific school site. Our DAGs are small diverse groups, and again I won't read this, but in terms of what they're accomplishing, that summarizes what we're looking for from them. I also like to think of them as paralleling the district project teams in terms of the project life cycle. They'll be involved during the planning phases, during the design phase, they'll be monitoring during construction, and then during post-occupancy. And I think it'll really serve to highlight the work and to ensure that we're getting that maximum participation from community. The next group to talk about is our generalized community participation. And many of you recall how we engaged the Marysville community as we were going through the insurance rebuild work there. And this is actually something that we thought worked extremely well, and something we'd like to see if we can also replicate during the bond work itself. So here, in terms of overall community participation, and think of this as augmenting the design advisory groups, we'll be looking at involving community on a series of site tours to familiarize with the site, to be involved during the master planning phase, which is our pre-design phase. As we get into design phase, and the first part of that is schematic design, which is where you start to generalize, you start to draw what the improvements look like. And then a series of design charrettes as we moved into design development, where the design team will actually start putting more detail together and really help describe what the improvements will look like. We also want to extend community involvement to conversations with contractors. As the builders come on to do the work, I think it'll be important for community to understand the work that's being done. Certainly, it was mentioned there is disruption in the communities relative to dust and noise, and so we want to be able to have a connection to ensure that we're taking into account those disruptions, because we really are committed to minimizing those. And then finally, looking at engaging current and potential partners in this process. There are a number of partners that the district has that are part of these capital improvements. Certainly Concordia comes to mind for the Fabian project, but there are numerous others as well, Parks and Rec. We look at Sun programs, we look at a number of different groups that will be participating on these projects. This public involvement process will also help define the priorities and characteristics of each of the schools. Again, even though we'll have a ed spec that will overall describe, I think it's clear that we would need to customize at the individual sites, and getting that additional input, I think, will help significantly. Inviting school communities to tour the swing sites. Recall that we are looking at, for several of this, for at least two of the high schools and for Fabian, needing to move the student body and the staff to other locations during construction phase. And to maintain the integrity of the student body and the community, we want to be able to showcase what the swing site will look like. For example, in the case of Franklin High School, looking at Marshall and giving people an opportunity to see what Marshall would look like to support the students there. And then finally, engaging student participation. Part of our equity and public purchasing and contracting includes a component of student career technical education. Student involvement throughout this process will be very key in providing an opportunity for students with interest in the design and construction industries to do internships with firms, career fairs, working actually on the design teams, shadowing some of the general contractor staff. We think will be really valuable for the curriculum that the students are going to be participating in. Staff participation. Certainly internal staff are key stakeholders in these projects. What this describes are a number of the ones that are going to be actively involved in these projects. Office of Schools, certainly our teaching and learning staff, our building level educators, custodial staff, all of the operations group, all have a very key role in this work. And as we go through the design charrettes, as we go through the whole process, they'll be very actively involved in this work. And then the partnerships that we are embracing, we do want to work with all levels of our partnerships, both public and private. And there's opportunities in many instances to actually grow these partnerships and these relationships. Again, the relationship with Concordia University on Fabian is one we really intend to capitalize on. Wraparound services, particularly at our high schools, we have a number of wraparounds that we want to take into account and ensure that we're capturing those in the designs of these large improvement projects. Our jurisdictional agencies are often left unstated, but our city has a number of bureaus that are very actively involved in the work, not only in doing plan check and issuing building permits to us, but also on the environmental front, in the land use areas. They're very involved, they're very engaged, and we do intend and have been participating in a number of conversations with them to ensure that we're getting their input. We do seek new capital partners, and we are looking where we have opportunities to invite others to the table. Parks and Rec comes to mind. Many of our schools are co-located with city park facilities, and so being able to expand partnership with them is something that we're going to be looking at very closely. And then we want to invite and encourage the community to identify any additional partnerships that we might be looking at. At this time, I'd like to hand it back to CJ, who will talk a little bit about the Bond Accountability Committee, and then wrap up and see if we can respond to any questions that you may have. CJ.
Thank you. And this material really is a reminder of the fact that the Bond Accountability Committee was chartered by the board in November. Their first meeting was in December. Their second meeting was in February. And they are a 7-member committee who are industry and audit experts. Their intention at this time is to provide quarterly updates to the board. Those will be supplemental to the monthly updates to the board that staff will actually be providing starting in April once we finish this series of 5 presentations. And then also acting as the contract review authority, the Board of Education also, of course, has contract authority over and approval over every contract in excess of $150,000. You will also be asking, we will be asking you for approval as we get to the master design completion phase of each of the 4 projects, as well as the high school projects and the schematic design phase as well. This is very similar to the process that we used during both of the design processes on Marysville. The first one where we were going through the full modernization for the May 2011 bond, and the second one where we were doing the insurance rebuild work. So it's simply a reminder that the projects will be coming before you, both as a Board of Education and as the Contract Review Authority, and the Bond Accountability Committee will be meeting with you at least quarterly and more often if they deem that more desirable. So just the next steps, talk a little bit about timeline. Developing and implementing the communication plan is high priority for us. The facilities vision that is part of the initial phase of the education specification plan and program is intended to come before you in early May. The Design Advisory Group Charter we'll be working on during the month of March. We intend to develop membership criteria, and the idea would be that the Roosevelt, Franklin, and Fabian Design Advisory Groups would have their first meeting in June, so that they're ready to hit the ground running in September when school is back in session. And then we're also currently working on mapping all of our existing partnerships so that we can have a robust conversation about what additional partnerships need to be brought into these 3 full modernization schools, as well as the Fabian K-8. And that work of the mapping existing will be complete in May. So now we're available to answer any questions you may have, or...
Thank you. Questions?
I don't have any questions. Thank you very much for your thorough presentation, and really for realizing that engagement is a really critical piece to the outcome here. I also want to mention one of the things that we had talked about prior to the bond and maybe shortly afterwards that I felt was really, really exciting was the opportunity that can come from this for our students. And particularly pulling out that student participation, job shadowing, internships, career fairs, and so on, I think is a really, really great opportunity. And not just for those students that are interested in the trades or but really students that can get exposure to sort of real world negotiations or real world project management, I think is pretty exciting. So thank you for including that. I also know it's something that's probably really hard to do and to think about during everything else that needs to happen. So I appreciate it being in there and being a priority.
So thank you for this presentation. As I look at this, it looks like the engagement that we're talking about here is primarily focused on the 4 full school modernizations. We also have 8 summers where we're going to have really intensive work on many of our schools, seismic upgrades, roof replacements, accessibility upgrades, science labs. So can you talk to us about what the engagement or partnership plans or communications plans or anything will be around that work?
Well, the way I would characterize it is that it is more of the communication plan kind of activity rather than formal community engagement. The nature of the work is such, particularly when we're talking about structural and roofing work, that it's not as interesting, I guess you could say, for a community conversation, but it's very important that the community know the work's going on and that they're aware of the contracting activities that are taking place on the school during the summer. So we currently have the summer 2013 projects, which will be going out to bid probably about mid-March or so. Those principals and staff have been engaged with the process in terms of developing the scopes of work and the timing, the relocation of the summer programs into alternate sites, because of course that's a requirement when we're tearing off the roof. So those kinds of activities are taking place at the school level and the neighborhood level, but I would characterize it more as a communication process rather than an engagement process, just because of the nature of the work.
So I guess I want to make sure that we are reaching out to certain communities, like in terms of some of our accessibility upgrades at these schools. I don't know if we have any folks who are advocates from that community who would be able to look at our design plans and make sure that we're hitting it correctly. Are we doing any kind of outreach at all?
Well, we certainly have advocates in the community for Universal Design and for Americans with Disabilities Act, as I'm sure you're aware. And to date, I don't know that they've been involved, but it doesn't mean that they can't be.
We have reached out to a number of the neighborhood communities, like for the 5 schools that are in our Summer 13 program. Wilson High School comes to mind, and we've spoken with them several times at a project team level and have talked in terms of the work scope, have talked in terms of what the work will do to the school. And so there's, I think there's a pretty solid understanding of the extent of the work there at Wilson, similarly at Bridal Mile, similarly at Alameda and Laurelhurst. So a lot of conversation there, but in a different way than what we've described in these design advisory groups. So more customized to each of the schools that are in this group package.
Sorry. And I'd just add that type of work is, I think, at least I envision it to be a lot of the work that this communications coordinator would be doing. Basically it's their full-time job to, not only support the larger, the design advisory groups and the bond accountability committees and those kind of more formalized, larger scale groups, but also, that person would be the one that would be doing a lot of the outreach to the individual neighborhood associations, going to the Hillsdale Business Association and talk about the type of work that's going to be happening at Wilson this summer, going to the PTA meetings, making sure that the principals have a little written blurb for their monthly school newsletter so that they can keep their communities informed about what's happening. But I think probably and I would leave it to the experts, but my take on it is that the nature of the work doesn't lend itself to as much kind of back and forth engagement and opportunity to kind of shape that work. I mean, like a roofing project is more or less a roofing project, but the impact is definitely there. So I think from a communication standpoint, I think it's a lot more informing, and oftentimes that's as important or more so sometimes. So. But that's the work, a lot of the work that the communications coordinator would be doing.
Yeah, I guess I just look at it as a huge positive opportunity for us to be out in the community. I attended the meeting that you all held at Franklin, which was great, and I know you had done one at Grant the night before. And I mean, people are just pumped up about investment. I mean, this is the first time in such a long time that we've really had that opportunity. And so I guess I just want to make sure that as we're looking at community engagement, that we're thinking through those summer projects and getting out to the community and talking about them, because, especially when you're talking about kids' safety and the seismic and the making schools accessible to every child, first floor, second floor, every room in the building. It's incredibly exciting, and so, just want to encourage us to.
I would also suggest that it's absolutely imperative that we make it visible district-wide, because the voters of the district are investing in Portland Public Schools, and we need to make them aware of the work that's being done, how significant it is. The roof alone at Wilson is a multi-million-dollar project. So these are significant investments that are being made even in this first summer, and we want the community to be aware of how extensive they are.
Right.
And I would echo your statements. When I was going out to individual school communities, when the bond was on the ballot, just informing a parent group about what was in it essentially for their school. And I was at a school that basically was just getting a roof. And I was a little bit concerned going in there. I wasn't sure what the reaction was going to be, but it was amazing. People were just thrilled that at the end of the summer they were going to have a roof that didn't leak on them.
Yeah,
and
it's huge.
I mean, that speaks to the state of our buildings right now, but it's important stuff.
That's great. Go ahead.
Other comments?
I'll just, excuse me, so my concern always is with the outreach piece of it. And I think we do a fairly good job of doing outreach to our parents. There's a long list that you guys had of how we're connecting with that. I think we have not been as successful with outreach to the general community. And so and there's a little bit in here, but there's not a lot. And we have to remember that 80% of our people are not parents. And so I would encourage Matt or whoever to be doing a lot more work on that end of it. And I don't think just going to a neighborhood association or going to a business association is enough. I think you really have to do a lot more outreach. And I'm also concerned about the student side of this and how we're engaging our students and how we're engaging our contractors with our students. I would expect that if we're doing roofs this summer, there should be some students involved around there somewhere. Is that the case?
Correct, and there will be.
Okay. And can you give us a little detail about how that happens?
So one of the items in our equity and public purchasing and contracting is the student career technical learning component. And so in there is a fairly descriptive summary of where we're expecting our consultants and our builders to engage. And we've identified different levels of contracts in terms of how much effort is put into it. If there's over $200,000 for an award over $200,000, there's a direct there's a connection with what's called BizConnect, which is a online protocol that allows the firm to actually connect with some of their core skill areas and then connect that with students. And we're working with Jeannie Yurkovich on that and her team of coordinators at the high school levels, and trying to connect or match up the students with those firms. For the contracts that are over $1 million, there's additional effort that goes into the work that they do relative to job shadowing, presentations, have the students participate. We've actually developed a matrix that describes each of the disciplines in the design and construction industries and how the student interests and how their curriculum connects to that work. And so we'll be monitoring that very closely to maximize the participation in it. And it starts with this summer, and we're anxious to see how it progresses. As we get into the work for the high schools, be a much greater opportunity there to connect with it.
So could we ask for a report back at the end of the summer? I'd really like to hear who's been involved, and I also would like to hear about this, how successful or not that program was, and what you see as the need for changes, so that as we move into these bigger projects, we're making sure that they're really, this is a perfect opportunity for us to do like almost a little pilot on this. So, and I think it's one of the most important parts of this bond, because it really does engage more than just our parent and community. It engages the whole community, and we really want the whole community to understand about our schools and how important that they are, and to be cheerleaders for us, or to be really involved, not just reading something that comes across on the newspaper or something like that. So, and I guess I have heard quite a bit out in the community about how we engage, and so I'm I'm really concerned about making sure that we do this right this time. So,
We agree.
enough said.
And we'll definitely plan the report back into the summer and how we progress with the group with the summer 2013
That's great.
improvements.
Thank you.
Well, I guess along the same lines is, hopefully we're looking at this as more of a historic opportunity in regards to being able to build a new culture, not only in ourselves in regards to how we engage the folks out there in the community, but also the city as a whole in regards to how it owns or takes responsibility also in terms of the schools themselves. Because there has been, I think even though there is tremendous use of our buildings by various community organizations, there's still quite a distance in regards to, even though, neighborhood association says, we want to participate on this thing, some of them do, very effectively. And again, neighborhood associations don't necessarily incorporate every person that lives in that neighborhood. A lot of folks at times, at least the ones that I had been to before, were owners of property and not the tenants that rented in those areas. And hopefully, I think that that we look at it. I think because some of the comments in particular that were made by people that participated in the bond before, in regards to how do we, I think we use that word engage quite a bit. But how do we approach in regards to getting people an opportunity to participate and contribute? In the same way that earlier on we heard, I believe it was Mr. Austin that's participating at Grant. There are a number of professionals out there that will be willing to participate or contribute in some ways, particularly as it relates to student learning, and looking at stuff, not just a roof, just another roof, because it isn't. I've done roofs, okay? And there are different types. I never done a solar roof, for example. And to me, that's a learning opportunity in a number of different fronts for students that I never had to. I don't understand the thing, but in terms of if we looking towards the future, in terms of sustainability, that's definitely something that we should be looking at much more closely and finding a way to then communicate that sort of like real life on-time kind of learning opportunities for our students. And I think you have it incorporated. I just think that, looking at how we've done work already, and here's an opportunity. I believe there was some money that was set aside for the community engagement, maybe $500,000 or so, and trying to look for ways in which we can maybe multiply some of that with maybe looking at some foundations, investing some more money if we really want to engage the city in participation. Hopefully, I think that we need to look at how can we be more creative, not just follow the process that we have outlined, but finding ways in which we can engage people. Years ago, I heard this, and I shared this with Antonio before, who was at Cesar Chavez at that point. Parents sometimes coming into the buildings, and there's an expectation they're going to be able to contribute in one way, and that is, you show up, you read to your kid or do something else, or you volunteer to do something that's related to academics. And parents sometimes come to this, says, well, I know how to paint, and they look around and say, well, yeah, but we don't need paint. And they look at this place and they says, yeah, you do. But we don't have real good vehicles except once a year, perhaps, in some of the schools that arrange in regards to that care day. Here's an opportunity, I think, to begin to look at engaging people on an ongoing basis to make sure that this buildings actually last, to the next century. Because I'm concerned about the quality of materials that I see these days, when they go up in new buildings. because I know that, like some of the housing that was done in Northeast Portland, for example, developed mold almost within 10 years because of the poor quality of the workmanship, but also the materials that were laid down there were different than, a century ago. So just thinking about those things, hopefully.
I just wanted to follow up, because I like the terms that Martine used, this historic moment, because I really think that this is a historic moment, and it's our big opportunity to engage the community. And I don't mean that as our parents, I mean that as a community to really become supportive of our public schools. I think they came together for us when they voted for the bond, and I think we have to continue to keep people involved and let them know what's happening and see if we can just hook them and pull them in and make sure that they're a part of what we're about to do, and so that then they can turn around and say they were a part of this historic moment. And when the next bond comes along, they'll have a chance to vote for another one and become even more historic. So I really liked the term that Martine used as a historic moment for Portland Public Schools.
And the reason I also say that in regards to an opportunity to engage people is, my neighbor, for example, who probably voted against the bond, limited income, is retired, feels like, the pressure of that. But he said, his thing was, look, why can't we all volunteer and go do some work and fix Roosevelt? People feel that way, but we do not provide an opportunity for it. I just want to make sure that even though there's funds for this new capital projects, that we don't lose sight of the fact that people are willing to volunteer.
Could you talk to us a little bit in terms of the Executive Advisory Committee, the 30-plus diverse membership? Can you just go over what the actual charge is of that particular group?
The Executive Advisory Committee is put together specifically to advise on processes regards the facilities visioning and education building specification processes. The first meeting was last Wednesday night, and what was put before them was a proposal as regards how to proceed, and they had a very vigorous discussion about whether that was the right proposal, how it perhaps needed to be changed.
Proposal about a high school?
No, a proposal about the process for facilities visioning. So it's strictly a proposal about the process itself, which will be taking place over the next 6 or 8 weeks. And what we have proposed, in fact, is something different than what we have done before. And it is about working with culturally specific organizations deeply and meeting them where they want to meet, having them facilitated by their own people if they would prefer. It's taking our racial educational equity policy and working to apply it real time in an environment that is a historic moment. We're kicking off the entire facilities visioning process for all of the full modernizations and replacements that will be occurring. And while it will end up being a living document, the facilities vision and even the education specifications, as master plans always are, the fact is that this is a very important moment in our history. And so we're very determined to seek out the perspectives of individuals and communities here as part of Portland who have not historically been represented, who have not historically been willing to come to our normal engagement processes. And so we have proposed something that's fundamentally different than what we've done in the past. And it received a good reception. At the committee, they provided additional ways of and groups to approach. So I would say they expanded the process rather than fundamentally changing it. So that committee charge really is about the process itself, although they will also be engaged in what will become a summit along with all the people who participate in the various visioning groups that we go through in April. So there will be active participants in the process after a lot of community input has been gleaned, but effectively they're there to evaluate and advise us on process.
That's actually really exciting. So there's two questions I have. One is, during the process, we heard a lot from the community about how we want the education for our kids to be driving what the actual buildings look like. And we also, I believe, put aside $1.5 million to have a discussion with the high school communities that aren't necessarily being built now. But I presume we would want to have that discussion really early, because I presume that we would want all of our high schools to have some basic components. So
Actually,
I'm trying to understand where the different
The
pieces fit
$1.5
in.
million is for a series of 6 master plans for the 6 high schools that are not being considered for full modernization and replacement in this bond. So rather than being a single exercise, there will be 6 community-based exercises around those master plans. The overall conversation that you're talking about is actually the facilities visioning and education specification process,
Which is what you were just talking about?
That's right. We've just kicked it off. It will be concluding probably sometime in August in terms of the final education specification documentations. But that is the overall roadmap, if you will, for the kinds of spaces and places that we believe each level of school should have. So if it's a K-5 or it's a K-8, it's a middle school, it's a high school, we've got a roadmap of the minimum requirements that we have as regards the space, the place, the quality, and those kinds of things, as all of which is underneath an overall arching facilities vision.
And so this group of 30 in this advisory committee is setting up the process to have this much larger community conversation before August.
Yes, in fact, the much larger community conversation is taking place in the next 6 weeks.
Any other questions? No? Okay. I guess I appreciate, I forgot that, I didn't comment. I appreciate moving the design advisory groups. It looks, I think at one point we had pushed them back, their membership, because we were like, what are they gonna do over the summer? But I appreciate scooting them up before summer so that they could kind of get their feet under them so that they could be ready to hit the ground in June. And I just want to echo what I heard Director Gonzalez and Knowles say about not just a historic moment, but this is an opportunity for us. I mean, schools are an infrastructure that is unparalleled in both our city and state. So I appreciate you calling out the bureaus of the city. We should be intimately involved with all the citizens of our community to figure out what piece can I own, what's my responsibility, whether I have a kid there or not, and how do we engage in a way. And it's really tough to receive that because some people sometimes have ideas that maybe won't fly. So I can remember somebody wanting to build a wall in a school and then working with facilities, and facilities are like, it has to be able to bear this much weight. And they're like, why would it ever need to bear that much weight? And they're like, well, because kids are going to hang on it and jump on it all day. They're like, oh, right. Sometimes we don't think of that, and I don't mean to make it sound like people are unaware, but there is a vetting process that sometimes gives us a reputation of being sticklers. But if they're going to last for 100 years, sometimes we have to do that. But finding those opportunities for us all to come together and say, we own these schools. This isn't something somebody else built. This isn't something that CJ and her team did. This is something we did together, because really without the voters and without this community, we wouldn't be doing it, and we couldn't do it. So I'm excited for that. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
We are going to now move on to a legislative update. Superintendent Smith, if you want to introduce this item.
I'll ask David Williams, who is our Director of Government Relations, to come on up and give us an update on what's going on with the legislature.
Thank you. Again, David Williams, your Director of Government Relations. Thanks for having me. So feel free to ask questions as we go, if that's the chair's prerogative. I'll try to be brief. We are in our 4th week of the legislative session, and after sort of a pretty frenetic first couple of weeks, I think the legislature is nicely settling into its pace for the session as Many legislators realize that they're not going to finish by the end of this month, so they might as well take a deep breath and slowly get their bills right as they move forward. So I feel like committees have settled into their pace, and bill introduction has slowed down for the most part as we pass key deadlines for bills to be introduced. So we mostly know the scope of work that the legislature is going to tackle this session, and the sort of land work of policy and money bills and all the other such that is coming before the body. So let me just get right to the punch, and let's hit the budget, which is, of course, the first and foremost priority for the district that we're working on. We feel cautiously optimistic about the direction the legislature is headed. We've been active in working with our coalition partners to advocate for a budget that, at the very least, holds harmless, but ideally begins to add back the cuts that education has taken for a while. A colleague of mine noted today, and I would concur, that it feels like for the first time in a couple of sessions there's a little more palpable understanding of the sort of hit that education has taken the last couple of sessions, the cumulative effect that that's had on the system being pretty devastating. And I think that the body's really coming to grips with that and understanding the role that they have to play going forward. Many of you, I'm going to highlight just a quick piece. Many of you might have seen this. I know we've got one hanging up upstairs. This is one of the key sort of coalition advocacy pieces for this session. There's a nice poster that, thanks to our friends at the PTA in the back, Otto Schell in his magic bag, I actually have a one I can show you. This is a piece that the coalition's been using this session. You know, many offices have gone to sort of paperless offices, which is valuable for the work of the body, but lacks sort of the tactile impact of being able to show, physically on paper what's happening. So in a clever way, sort of to get around that, we've actually distributed these posters, and many legislators have hung them in their offices, or caucus offices have hung them, to give people a sense of where the education budget stands. And I'll turn around so folks back here can take a look too if they want to see. So what we've done is attempt to highlight in obviously a graphical way, but also a textual way with the text on the paper, what the various impact would be at different funding levels should the legislature settle on those numbers. And I will note, we've also got, for this green space down here, we've got individual district impacts that I believe about 65 districts or so have completed, along with PPS, that we're then going back to the offices that have these or that don't, as a piece that they can physically attach to this poster as well, detailing the impacts for their local districts. The key is really helping legislators to understand the impact on the ground that an otherwise meaningless number would have on them. When they start talking about $6 billion, it doesn't have a tangible result for them when they talk about it. So really making that connection to their local district has been the most effective way we've found in the past to advocate for education funding, and I think the most effective way we're getting traction this session in detailing that. Obviously, it took some time for those in the legislature to come to grips with some of the flaws in the state roll-up budget, if you will, that the governor presented back in December, and the understanding of how little it did to actually capture a true roll-up and a true hold harmless budget on the ground. But I think that they have come to those grips. So the co-chairs of the Ways and Means, which is the state's budget writing committee, will release their budget on Monday, March 4th. So that will really be the watershed moment for us to see, as we move forward, what the groundwork of funding advocacy is going to be for the session. We feel fairly confident that's going to be something very significantly higher than the governor's budget. The questions that remain in that are the path to actually fund that number. So it's one thing for the co-chairs to pencil in something 655, 675, or even 6895. It's another thing for them to actually have the revenues to pay for that. And that, I think, is the challenge that they're tackling right now. The two key pieces of that, well, three, the one being the actual state revenues. The other two being any potential reforms to the state's public employee retirement system, and then any potential reforms to the state's system of tax expenditures or tax credits, as many know them. And I think the package of those two items and the amount they total up to is really the math that will get the co-chairs to whatever level of funding they want to propose. So we would anticipate the co-chairs will release a budget on March 4th that will have some amount of, let's say, hard cash in it, as the governor did his hard cash of 6.15. The co-chairs would have some amount of hard cash and then a sort of assumed PERS savings. We do feel pretty certain that there will be some PERS reforms coming out of this session, and that will be a part of their ability to reach some level of school funding, as they will assume a reduction in PERS rates, thereby lowering our expenditures, creating a higher quote-unquote funding level for education. What that PERS package looks like is still really up in the air, and it may even still be up in the air when the co-chairs propose their budget. They may simply pencil in a number and say the PERS savings need to achieve this amount to get us there. That will depend on how well negotiations go over the next week with leadership in the building. The last we were sort of hearing is some changes to the PERS COLA cost of living adjustment for retirees is on the table, some sort of indexing of that or means testing of that cost of living adjustment. Also some sort of adjustment to out-of-state retirees who currently get a favorable tax treatment, income tax treatment, and as well some likely the co-chairs will propose some method of changing the amortization of the PERS unfunded liability, which is currently amortized over 20 years. If you ask me to explain amortization and its impact, I will have reached the extent of my knowledge of it. The other piece being tax deductions, which will be on the other side of the ledger, and that's the revenue that they will get to the hard cash. And again, this may even just be simply a number that the co-chairs pencil in. But really laying the groundwork and setting the dollar figure for the state school fund of hard cash and quote-unquote spends like with any kind of PERS savings really lays down the mark of saying the legislature must hit this funding level, and if it is to maintain education funding in the state. And we feel pretty good about that strategy and very supportive of that effort, obviously trying to push that number as high as it can be. Feel very strong about the coalition messaging this session. I think everybody is using very similar messaging in the building and getting a lot of traction with legislative leadership on all sides of the aisle and with the governor. I also then want to talk about some key legislation as it fits your legislative platform and the work the district is doing. Go through a couple of those. We have some other smaller bills. We have, I think, Director Blau, you mentioned a charter school bill a couple weeks ago in a board meeting. We do have a charter school bill that we've introduced, and I'm happy to report that that's tentatively scheduled for a public hearing and possible work session, and we're very excited to have a chance to talk about charter schools in the state, which we've reached sort of the mature age of about 12 years, and talk about the role they play in a district's ability to target resources and to really target areas needed the most in a district, and that's what our bill does, and we'll be talking about more about that in the coming weeks. We have a small fix to urban renewal statute that would pull our local option levy out of urban renewal tax increment financing upon renewal. And again, also very excited, that's been scheduled for a work session in the Revenue Committee and so far has no opposition. We're feeling very optimistic about that. We also have a bill around capital bonding, state bonding for K-12 capital construction. There's actually about 4 bills that are under active consideration. Our bill focuses primarily on state bonding for school security infrastructure, but there is a more general bonding bill that's coming out of the Senate. Our bill is scheduled for a hearing next week. I think we feel very good about the state's position vis-a-vis capital bonding at the moment. Of course, the state currently doesn't do any capital bonding for K-12 construction, so getting sort of the camel's nose under the tent, if you will, and getting the state to begin to test that authority of capital bonding for K-12 capital construction is very important. We're feeling optimistic about that. And then lastly, the 2 big pieces of our platform be dealing with property tax reform. As you know, we've been working on 2 constitutional amendments specifically that would bring about a little more rationality and adequacy in property tax collections. One would deal with the what is called compression, and that is the fact that when you exceed Measure 5 limits in your tax rates, all of your tax levies are compressed. The first being compressed to zero is the local option levy. So just to put that in round numbers for us, our property tax local option levy, which the voters overwhelmingly approved, at $1.99 a thousand assessed value, currently collects about $50 million. If that were pulled outside of compression, it would collect nearly $80 million. So it is under collecting by almost $30 million, I think 27 and change to be precise. So there's sort of significant untapped resources that the voters have approved and the voters have spoken, but were unable to collect due to the vagaries of the impact of Measure 5 and its interplay with Measure 50. The second measure would be resetting property value from assessed value to real market value at sale of property. This would have the effect of collecting significant resources statewide in every school district's permanent rate collections. In the out years, at 10 years and beyond, it's collecting nearly $1 billion a biennium for public education. So while we're fighting over, $500 million in the legislature, say the difference between the governor and the co-chairs, we're talking about very significant resources in the out years there. We're optimistic about those. We have some challenges about trying to figure out where there's a viable path with the voters on these measures, but we have some cursory public hearings scheduled for next week on the measures, and we have a lot of let's call it institutional momentum on the House side especially to try to tackle this issue, to try to raise more adequate resources on the local levels. So I think we're getting a lot more conversation than we have in the past, not just about the overall funding level for education, but also about a lot of the individual issues of interest, whether they be financial or policy-based, that affect local school districts. And I think we feel very positive about the current direction the legislature is going. And that positive feeling has a shelf life of about 20 minutes. So talk to me in 20 minutes and I'll let you know if it's changed at all.
Great.
At the moment, just for your reference, we're looking to find the right opportunity for sort of board collective advocacy in the legislative session. A lot of the first month or two of the session is really filled with a lot of these nitty-gritties about getting bills scheduled, getting priority bills introduced, sort of figuring out the work plans of the committees, the state revenue forecast and the co-chair's budget. And then beyond that, there will be greater opportunity for collective advocacy and greater impact of such advocacy going forward. And we'll certainly keep you apprised of those opportunities and try to put together as many of them as make sense and are possible for you all. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you guys have.
Any thoughts, questions? I guess I don't have a question, but I'm going to make it clear for myself. Anything short of 6895 is a lack of prioritization because, as we say, 6-7 is a hold steady. It is not okay at how many teachers have been cut. It is not okay our class sizes. It is not okay that students aren't getting a full schedule. It's not okay kids aren't getting library. So I just want to be clear so that when our representatives, who I'm sure that I'll be talking with, won't be surprised, and it's not some number I picked out of the sky, it's not some pie in the sky, it's not even undoable. There are a number of paths to that number. I just want to be clear that so that people aren't surprised that if we're short of 6895, we're not doing what we should.
You know, it's an excellent comment, and it's one we've been conscious of including in our conversations with legislators. Is really about messaging. You know, I think in the past both sides have been caught off guard by each other's messaging around school funding and a real disconnect and lack of understanding of what various budget levels mean to districts. You know, on this poster, it just happens to be right here in the fold, that 675 number, you'll notice that's called stability, because that's all it is. And in fact, in the detailing of what that means both statewide and for the district, we really talk about that as just a hold where we're at the moment kind of budget. And so we've been really working hard with legislative leadership, the budget writers, and the governor's office to have a better understanding that whatever budget they end up settling on, that we have cohesive messaging around whether or not it's a victory, whether or not it's just a hold where we're at. We can't be calling investment something that's not really an investment. So I think we definitely take that very much to heart this year.
David, could you read off from that poster the organizations that actually were involved in creating that? Because I think they deserve a whole lot of credit.
Sure, absolutely. So the main statewide organizations obviously forming the coalition, our logo is not on here, but of course PPS is an active participant in this. But this is the Oregon Education Association, the Confederation of Oregon School Administrators, the Oregon School Boards Association, Oregon PTA, and the Oregon School Employees Association. All very key allies in this school funding fight.
I don't recall, has there been a poster? I mean, this coherent a message provided in such a visual, memorable way, and one that, as you say, doesn't just give numbers, but really explains what that means in terms of impacts at the school level. It's really exciting. Yeah.
Yeah, it's good. You know, Otto's probably gotten his magic bag. We had a number of years ago, we actually had a very nice brochure that we put out one year really detailing the impacts. That was the last time I remember us being that cohesive in our message. I want to say that was 2003 when we were that together. But this poster has had a pretty significant impact in the building. You know, obviously, I think it's the work that goes behind it as well. Right. But you know, seeing it in offices, I referenced it in a meeting I had the other day with a non-PPS legislator, sort of an introductory meeting, and I referenced the poster, and he says, "Oh, you mean that one?" Which was on the back of his door, of course, in his office. So you know, I think it's good to see it around and good to see people really internalize what we're talking about.
Great. Thank you, and thank you for the update. And I know that our community is standing at the ready. I've gotten numerous questions of how do we support you, what can we do, when do we go, where do we point? So please, let's keeping up on that historic idea and engagement. Thank you. We're now going to move on to the board's business agenda. Having already voted on resolutions 4718 through 4720, Ms. Houston, are there any changes to our business agenda?
There is one change.
Okay.
On Resolution 4717, page 5 of the business agenda. In the chart, you'll see the word contract amount column. Where it says greater than, it really should read not to exceed.
That seems like an important change. Thanks. All right, do I have a motion and a second to adopt the business agenda with that one additional change? Second. Director Regan motions and Director Morton seconds the adoption of the business agenda. Ms. Houston, do we have any citizen comment on the business agenda? No, we do not. Is there any board discussion on the business agenda? No. We'll now vote on the business agenda. All in favor, please indicate by saying yes. Yes. All opposed, please indicate by saying no. Business agenda is approved by a vote of 6-0 with Student Representative Garcia voting yes. The next meeting of our board will be a study session held on Monday, March 4th, 2013 at 6 o'clock. This meeting is adjourned.